Good morning, and good morning everybody in the chamber and online. Welcome to the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee of the 7th of October. And it's good to be able to welcome those of you online. We're looking particularly today at financial issues in terms of a financial update for the last quarter and a forward look at our finances in terms of the medium-term financial plan, and we'll be coming later in the agenda to matters relating to investment and commercial performance. But we'll start this meeting also by welcoming a new member to the committee, Councillor Garrett. Welcome, and it's good to have you joining the committee. I hope you find it a very interesting one, and I look forward to your contributions as we move forward. I also see the Cabinet Member, Councillor Callard, online. It's good to see you there, Councillor Callard, and thank you for joining the meeting. We have officers in the meeting as well who will be able to deal with questions that will be arising, and that's Peter Davis, Jonathan Davis, and Nick Keys. It would be probably very good if you just signal who you are when you speak for the first time to members of the public who may be tuning in. So first of all, apologies for absence. Do we have any, Robert?
None today, Chair.
Great, that's good. Full house. And any declarations of interest? None that we're aware of. So we'll move on to item number 3, which is the financial update. And it's obviously an important update. They always are. We're very aware over the last couple of years the challenging financial situation that councils face, and therefore we've been following progress and development closely at the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee. And, you know, the work that we're doing now is to scrutinise the revenue budget forecast for the 2024-2025 financial year. And as part of our role, as is set out in the recommendations, it's whether or not effective budget monitoring is in place and the extent to which budgets are spent within the agreed budget and policy framework, including any reasonableness of explanation for variances, and considering also the achievement of progress in meeting budget savings targets. So those are very much at the heart of our focus. And we're on to that item. I'll ask, it may well be Councillor Callard, you wanted to introduce the report, and perhaps then we could have a summary of key issues, possibly from one of the officers. Councillor Callard?
Thank you, Chair. Just checking you can all hear me okay in the chamber? Yeah, good stuff.
All good.
I'm pleased to introduce this financial update to the committee today, which provides up-to-date information regarding our financial performance against our budget. The first half of the 2024-2025 financial year has seen the continuation of financial headwinds, which are having a significant impact upon the council's service operating environment. We've been through these before, but to summarise, they are the wider and longer-lasting impact of the pandemic, both economically and socially, particularly in the areas of homelessness, children's services, adult social care, and children's additional learning needs. The cost of living challenges, which continue to have an impact in our communities. And whilst we've seen headline inflation falling, some discrete areas of council services continue to experience cost pressure on supplies and services alongside supply chain issues. In continuing efforts to combat inflation, interest rates have remained high, with revised forecasts suggesting that they will remain higher for longer than anticipated at the time of setting the budget. And finally, the council continues to deal with a shortage of staff resources in some areas. At the July 2024 Cabinet meeting, Cabinet received an indication that services were reporting an early cost pressure of £873,000. This position has since deteriorated, with the latest forecast indicating a forecast budget deficit of £3,388,000. An overview of this can be seen in Table 4.2 in the covering report, but it will come as no surprise to the committee that the area of greatest pressure is in social care and health. The total forecast deficit against budget of £3,388,000 is made up of in-year budget pressures of £1,334,000 that have developed since the budget was set in February 2024, alongside a forecast shortfall in meeting budgeted savings targets of £2,055,000. Appendix 1 to this report outlines the service variances in detail. Of particular concern is our school budgets and reserves. The overall level of school reserves are currently forecast to move further into deficit by £4,929,000 by the end of the 2024-2025 financial year, to a collective deficit balance of £5,832,000. The legacy impact of the pandemic continues within our schools, particularly in respect of attendance, behaviours and increased additional learning needs. This has required increased staff and specialist resources to tackle the issues presenting and increased overall costs of provision. Higher than budgeted pay awards for both teaching and non-teaching staff have also impacted upon budgets. Those schools budgeting to end the 2024-2025 financial year in deficit balance are expected to bring forward recovery plans by October half term. Close monitoring and support will be given to these schools, as well as those at risk of entering a deficit position over the medium term, to ensure that the proposed actions to address medium-term budget challenges are instigated. As we move towards the next formal monitoring period, work will continue to deliver on the structured approach to tackling the underlying budget pressures, with particular importance assigned to tackling costs which have the ability to be recurrent for the 2025-2026 financial year and beyond. Thank you, Chair, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. I don't know if Peter Davis, you wanted to pull out any key points that Councillor Callard hasn't covered, or if you wanted to go straight into questions.
I'm happy to go straight to questions, but I guess Jonathan's with us here, Head of Finance, but currently acting up as Council Section 151 Officer, principally the report author, so I don't know whether Jonathan wants to add anything to Councillor Callard's initial comments.
Jonathan.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Thanks, Peter. Yes, Jonathan Davis, Head of Finance. I think that was a quite comprehensive run through from Councillor Callard, so thank you for that. I think the key part of it for me is, just to highlight that financial discipline now through to the end of the year is going to be paramount. That's a whole authority responsibility. Whilst finance will support that, we're acutely aware that that isn't something that we can do alone, and the authority as a whole will need to embrace that as we move through to the end of the financial year. The financial teams will continue to support that structured approach that Councillor Callard outlined, really approaching all mitigations that we have available. What I would say is that we continue to see difficulty with the timing and quantum of unbudgeted grants. It does make it quite difficult to forecast this early in the year. So, whilst we have the best information that we have at the time that this report was published, we're acutely aware that could change quite quickly as we move through the year. So, the regular updates will be important to this committee, I'm sure. We continue to take a risk-based approach to this. I think we heard that both adults and children's services continue to be a key focus for us, and the Financial Management Board continue to have a key role to play in scrutinising the actions around those areas. The delivery of the savings targets within those areas is going to be key for us as an authority. The reason I say that is because it will deliver recurrent cost reduction. It will help with future years as well. So whilst we're seeing a slight delay in that coming forward, it's going to be important that we deliver on that over time. Just finally, for me, I think the school's position stands out as a key risk now as we move through to the end of the year. Appendix 3 to the report shows that there's a quite large variability in some of those forecasts coming forward, and the work continues to understand that on a school-by-school basis. We heard Councillor Callard touch upon some of the reasons for that. Those budget recovery plans that schools bring forward are going to be vital in understanding both the timing and how they can approach those measures that they're going to be putting in place, conscious that we will have some lead-in time into some of those changes. So, Chair, I think outside of that, I think everything's been covered, so I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. The point you're raising, just before we move into the questions, for clarification, that timing and quantum of grants being a particular risk, and we get that, we can see that. We have a significant reliance on grants in particular areas. I just wondered if we have a greater concern around our reliance on grants than is typical of other authorities, local authorities, or is it, are we very much, in the pack?
Thank you, Chair. So I think that's a very difficult question to answer in terms of perhaps how some of the other authorities approach some of the use of that grant funding. So different grants will come with different terms and conditions, as we all know. We will always maximise the ability to passports and core costs into those grants where allowable. I think we have some services who are more reliant on grant income than others, and always will be. It's the nature of those services. I think the important thing for us is working with Welsh Government to get more certainty around the quantum and the value of those grants, but also continuing the good work that we're seeing in terms of transferring some of those specific grants into the wider Welsh Government settlement, which gives us flexibility and certainty year by year of the value of those grants. So that gives us an ability to plan for the longer term and allows us to take a more medium to longer term approach on service delivery. So that's where our key focus is at the moment, working with Welsh Government to establish that changing process, which will help services with some certainty going forward.
Thanks. Peter.
Thanks, Chair. It's only a brief comment. I think we may have a couple of instances, I'm sure, given the second report that follows this in terms of the medium-term financial plan update. We're always going to naturally see some crossover of issues. I think what is positive to see is Welsh Government is continuing to maintain its commitment in terms of the piece of work that it started last year, which is not complete yet in terms of streamlining of specific grant funding. Personal perspective, I think there's a real opportunity if Welsh Government and local authorities properly invested their time in that. I think the second point is, and I think we're seeing it even in the current year, I think Welsh Government, you'd have to be probably sat in a dark room for the last couple of years to realise, I guess, the extent of the pressures on public services, but on local authorities and local authorities in Wales. Welsh Government clearly understands that, and I think to Jonathan's inputs there, we are seeing flexibility from Welsh Government in terms of reconsidering terms and conditions and being able to use those in slightly different ways and to be able to manoeuvre specific grant funding towards the core purposes of those specific grants. but Welsh Government being flexible, to my point, in being able to ensure that local authorities are drawing on the full extent of those grants. So I think that is positive to see, but I think the pressure clearly needs to be maintained on Welsh Government to have that work continue.
Thanks, Peter. I think one thing that would be helpful as you're raising this as the timing and the quantum of grants to risk is to, maybe you can't provide us with this just now, but perhaps you could after the meeting. The number of staff members who are grant funded would be helpful to us to understand what risk looks like. Otherwise it's a concerning statement, but it would be useful to know that. If that could be provided after the meeting, that would be helpful. Thank you. Looking at hands up, and I can see, and thank you for the introductions to the report. There's obviously a lot in there that we would very much like to just have a closer look at. And the first person with their hand up is Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the introduction and the report. Thank you very much. It's good to see this information. It's something that I mention almost every time that we discuss cuts and budgets and vacancies, and I'll repeat it again, is the impact on the existing our existing resource and people, and whether their mental health, whether they're being overloaded, and also building on that, Councillor Neil and other people of the group have the committee have suggested there's other areas that need to be looked at. Possibly, are the right people in the right place as people leave? Is all that work being done? I suggest it possibly is, but there's something that Councillor Callard just said as well about the schools. The schools obviously are greatly impacted by the budget cuts. And are we engaging with the staff? It was Councillor Callard just said, closely monitoring that they're delivering to their agreed plans, but are we also supporting them? I guess we are supporting them because, of course, they've got additional pressure and loss of resource. So how are the staff managing under these awful conditions that people are under at the moment? And the other area may be health and social care, where it's stated there's a reduction of staffing by 1.5 million. How many is that, please, in staff, and what impact does that have on delivery? And well, we'll probably talk about that again, but as vacancies rise, how are we reorganising ourselves, or making sure that we've got the right people in the right place, as you've just mentioned about grants and funding? If we don't get grants, are we reutilising those people that we can in other areas? So have we still got the correct structure? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. We'll work our way through those, and I won't ask Councillor Callard or officers to answer all of them in one block, but perhaps we can deal with them one at a time. So the first, excuse me, the first question is about vacancies and the residual impact on staff. Do we have the right people in the right place? But what do we know about that? And I don't know who wants to pick that one up.
I'll just kick off if that's okay, please, Chair.
Thank you.
Before bringing in the officers, thank you for the question, Councillor Bond. It's something that I think we're acutely aware of, in terms of the times that we find ourselves in local government at the moment, and the financial constraints, and how that those pressures are impacting on our workforce. We do monitor staff absence. I'm not aware at the moment of any significant increase in staff absence as a result of increased stress, but that's not to say that our workforce are not, I guess, having higher workloads if there are areas where we're carrying vacancies at the moment. We are continuing to recruit in areas where we need to, in order to maintain service provision. But I think it's a fair point that that we would anticipate pressure on our staff to be high at this time when while our budgets are so constrained. I don't know if we've got any officers. I think specifically in social care, you raised that point, Councillor Bond. If if Tyrone or Jane want to come in and share a comment on that.
Thank you. Jonathan or Peter?
Thank you, Chair. We do have Jane Rogers, Chief Officer for Social Care, on the call. We'll be happy to come in. I think Councillor Callard's points are very valid there. We are looking at the structured approach to this on a service-by-service basis. But I think, given the specific nature of the question from Councillor Bond, I think Jane and potentially Will McLean would be happy to come in and answer those on the specific areas.
Okay, and to Jane Rogers, we're kind of jumping to the fifth question, but that's the 1.5 million reduction in staff in health and social care that is planned. Are you able to describe just what number of reduction that might be, and how are we monitoring? How do we know what the residual impact is on those staff who remain in place? Are you able to help us understand that, Jane?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Jane Rogers, Chief Officer for Social Care and Health. The savings that we've made from staffing this year have predominantly come from our direct care workforce, which we were able to achieve following the provider market becoming more robust this year. We had some residual vacancies within direct care, which we were able to then consolidate within the savings, and the service wasn't hugely impacted because these were existing vacancies. And in terms of being able to ensure that the service to people wasn't compromised, we were able to sort of broker those hours out into the provider market. The other area that we made savings on was around the redesign of our support services for learning disability, which we're in the process of now. So we've been able to make some changes to our cost for staff by just looking to deliver services in a different way. I think Tyrone, who's the finance manager, is on the call, who may have something to add there.
Just to say, Jen, we will be looking at your reports tomorrow, in some depth, and that's going to be really, really important, really helpful. It probably help inform us if we had an understanding, and I think that's what the question from Councillor Bond was relating to, just to that 1.5 million that's in the plan for this year in terms of staff reduction. Just how many staff would that equate to in 1.5 million, and what's the overall staff number in health and social care, so we can just have, and residents could have an understanding of the scale and the quantums.
Chair, would it be okay if I came back to you in a couple of moments for that? I'll indicate when I do have that answer. I just need to have a quick consultation with Tyrone in terms of numbers.
That's absolutely fine. I wouldn't expect you to have everything just immediately there, but it would help us in order to be able to just talk about and ask questions about your reports tomorrow, to have a better understanding of this in terms of the numbers and the finances today. But thank you. If you could let me know when you've got that. That's very good. We were looking also, or Councillor Bond was looking at schools and the impact on staff in schools. You mentioned, Councillor Bond, how we might be engaging with staff. I suppose that could be, are we carrying out any staff surveys to find out actually what they're telling us? And are we doing a similar thing with schools to find out, are they telling us anything about particular concerns or pressures?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just pick that up to kick off, if that's okay. We're in the process at the moment of just working through the school recovery plans. Myself and Councillor Martin Groker, Cabinet Member for Education, will be meeting with the leadership of the schools who set a deficit budget for the 2024-2025 financial year. Prior to that, they will be doing some work with our finance team who work within our education department in order that we can, I guess, better understand their concerns and the nature of why they're carrying those deficit budgets. I think I mentioned in my introduction that we are still seeing a lot of post-pandemic pressure in schools, and I think schools are working very hard in order to mitigate the impact of that against the impact on their pupils. I think that's probably part of the reason why we're seeing them carry this deficit, is that in order to provide that service to their children, that they've not been able to meet their budget that was awarded to them, or I should more clearly say some schools haven't been able to meet the budget that was allocated to them at the start of this financial year, and that's a process that we'll be working through with them. I think up until October half term. I believe that we've got Will McLean on the call. He may be available to come in and comment on that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Callard, and I'll ask Will McLean to come in a second. This particular question was not about deficit itself. The question was about the impact on staff. So it's a question about the impact on staff within the council and the impact on staff within our schools. And whilst many of us in the committee will have, from the work that we might be involved in closer to where we live or work, we may have a good understanding of, or a reasonable understanding of local schools, but the picture across the county. So it's very much to try and understand, are we, what that looks like within our schools, but separately, what it looks like within staff within the council, and whether we're actually carrying out staff surveys to ask for their feedback to tell us, rather than us determining it or making judgments about it. So, Will, perhaps you could pick that up, and perhaps the council staff, it would be back to officers and Councillor Callard. But Will, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Will McLean, Chief Officer for Children and Young People. I think it would be fair to say that at the moment, within our schools, our head teachers and our teachers and our support staff are experiencing significant pressures. I think that is the same right across the public service at the moment. What we talk to our head teachers about are pressures where they are trying to ensure that schools continue to manage on a day-to-day basis. We're seeing more sickness related to COVID still, and head teachers and senior members of staff are stepping in to manage that, to ensure that there's as Councillor Callard pointed out, to ensure that our learners receive a seamless and continuous education. And of course, we have seen since the pandemic a change in some of the behaviours that challenge in school, and we are seeing higher levels of those challenging behaviours, and we are seeing higher levels of children presenting with additional learning needs. That can mean sometimes that children present in ways and become dysregulated in the classroom that can be difficult for staff to manage and maintain, and that can be difficult for the staff on an ongoing basis. So we're really aware of that pressure. It's one of the drivers behind some of the expenditure that Councillor Callard's alluded to, and I would completely recognise that. The schools themselves engage significantly in supporting their own members of staff. So we have a statutory framework for the whole school approach for emotional and mental health in schools. So all schools must comply with that, and that's supported through Emma Taylor in MCC and through the EAS as well. So schools are aware of what they should be doing to support their members of staff, but absolutely I would recognise that it's a challenging time for all members of staff on the front line.
Well, that's really helpful, and thank you for just informing us on what is and what remain extremely challenging issues within our schools. You know, we appreciate the incredible work that our teaching staff and all staff within our schools do. You know, it's an amazing aspect of their performance that sometimes goes unheralded. You mentioned, indeed, you mentioned that COVID remains an issue in terms of staff sickness, and that's something that is I think worth, without exaggerating it, it's worth recording that particular point, because we still have a lot of people saying COVID is behind us, and actually within our school populations we can see that there are sickness levels. This particular question was about what do we know about the staff within the schools. I hate to kind of ask this question again, but you know, we do need to try and understand what we're doing about this. So it's the two separate areas: staff within our schools, staff within the council. Are we directly or indirectly conducting or establishing staff surveys to understand what their views are about pressures within their groups, or additional or changes? Or are we basing this very much on the very important discussions that we have with the senior management within our schools?
So in terms of, we don't conduct a direct survey with school teachers. That's done on a school basis, so that would be absolutely part of every school's kind of process around their evaluation each year. How they develop their school development plan would be to understand the resource that they have, so we would do, so that the schools would do that. But beyond that, there's wider intelligence within the system, the positions of representative bodies and so on, make it clear that this remains an issue. So I've got a high degree of confidence in understanding what the position in schools is.
So that information that individual schools might conduct staff surveys, that could be or is being shared with you and colleagues within the council. So we've got, you know, like a first-hand account of what teachers are saying, not simply through management structures. Would that be a reasonable understanding?
We don't always ask for it proactively, but we know that it takes place. It's part of our assurances, but it's not something that I gather on a kind of a termly basis or even an annual basis.
But perhaps that's something that we should be aware of, because if we're actually directly involved in the funding of our schools, recognising all the aspects of limitations on that funding and the pressures on the funding, it does seem like a bit of an important area for us to get a really good reading of, particularly if, as this report tells us, that by the end of October this year, all schools that are forecast to be in deficit will be bringing forward their plans to recover from the forecast deficit. Is that something that we should be much more directly aware of, or do you not believe that is the case?
I think that whilst it's important to understand the pressures within the schools, and you know, I know any senior officer in this organisation would work with their team, and we see the schools very much as part of that team, to understand what's happening with their own areas. So we would always do that. I think the concern and where it links to the financial position is if we're to remain concerned that the position in schools would not allow a recovery. I guess that's where the risk would present itself. At the moment, we know that the pressures exist. We know that, of course, at the moment, so the children who have just started reception would have been children born in the first year of the pandemic, so we know that this will continue. So those children are the children who won't have had those normal socialisation aspects because of the position society was in 2021. So we know this is going to carry on. So I think whilst it's an important part, there are broader conversations to be had with schools about their financial recovery, of which this is an aspect, but I don't believe it's a fundamental aspect in that relationship.
Okay, thanks, Will. You know, this report is also forecasting that of the, if I remember correctly, of the 34 schools, 19 are forecast to be in deficit. So I think the reason why this is a concern, and Councillor Bond, I think you flagged it up, and I'm simply just trying to press it so we understand it better, is particularly in those schools that are going through have already gone through and will be going through further budget management, which inevitably is resulting in reductions in staffing levels in one form or another, to the extent to which staff actually need to tell us how they feel about any new pressures or realistic pressures, and it's to get a reading of that as a performance and overview. It would be good to have. But I take your point that you're in touch about that. It may be something we need to, and I just ask you to potentially consider whether or not this is something we should just be more cognizant of in a transparent way through the schools, so that it can help to inform us when it comes to budget setting next year, for example. Just how our school teachers and staff within schools, not just teaching staff, feel. But thank you. Thanks very much. On the wider issue of staff within the council, Peter, did you want to pick that up? And question being whether or not we know enough, and whether or not we do or we should carry out staff surveys to improve our understanding.
Thanks, Chair. I think very similar to sort of Will, just in terms of the sort of the broader infrastructure, I guess, that sits all around this. Certainly away from schools, in a council setting, we've got very well established arrangements in place. In no particular order. Obviously, we've got HR business partners that work across the council with directorate management teams, with manager supervisors, providing all the necessary level of support. And I guess to the specificity of the question, really, just in terms of whether that information flow, that intelligence, is being captured and gained and being looked at and responded to. So I think in the ordinary course of business, then that's through both line management and the support that is naturally offered through that, as well as HR business partners. That significantly looks to respond broadly and specifically to issues as they arrive. Clearly, we've got good and strong relationships with unions. Equally, I guess, Will, applies to schools as much as it does to non-schools. And those relationships and that flow of information is also equally important, and in terms of the members that they represent. The question around the survey, we've got a staff survey due to go out later this month, I think either later this month, early November, which is just being finalised at the moment. Just wanting to make sure that we get full and proper reach out and across the organisation. Not everybody possesses a laptop and an email account, as you're probably all aware. So it's important that we go out in a variety of ways to make sure that that survey reaches all corners of the organisation, and we get that proper level of temperature check and understanding that allows us then to reflect and respond. I think probably finally, and I think it's always something that we've been strong at, particularly in the last decade or so, I think our training offer, and particularly in and around sort of resilience and well-being support and the like, that's been evolved and developed over time, and that continues. And there's a lot of guidance out there and available on the People Services Hub, which is our intranet. And we've also got obviously the counselling service, which plays its part, and in terms of where staff who are struggling, counselling's not for everybody, it's personal choice, but we've got well-established arrangements there just to make sure that staff are being supported either back into work or in work, depending on the nature of the sickness or otherwise that's been encountered. So hopefully that's helpful, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. And it's particular, and so we note that in the next month or so, it may be in November, but it's in that sort of time frame that there would be what it sounds like an annual survey, and that will be the results of that will be brought forward and potentially could be shared with this committee if we wanted to look at that at some time in the next few months. Thank you. I suppose really this is something that is a genuine concern for all of our councillors, very much because we are a council that has a lot of employees working from home or working out and about in the field. They're not all based in offices where it might be more, they are more visible, and it might be more the case of being accessible to just a common understanding of how they are, but where they're in more potentially individual, not to say isolated, but separate locations. That reading of temperature must be more challenging, so it does seem very important that we have it, so thank you for that. Councillor Bond, was there anything else that we didn't pick up on from your questions?
Sorry about that. I think that was very comprehensive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I can see Jane Rogers has flagged up that I think, Jane, you now have the information we were looking for, which was very much about what the staff number reduction is from £1.5 million funding reduction in health and social care, and the overall staffing levels in health and social care. Jane, good to see you back.
Thank you, Chair. So just focusing on adult services in particular, there's approximately 600 full-time equivalents, and out of that, 35 posts were affected. Some of those people were redeployed, so 20 posts, approximately full-time equivalent posts, were affected. And as I said before, those posts were from direct care services. As I described around the rebrokerage, we were able to do that, and the two redesign areas around support services for LD, which was the cessation of the residential respite, and the remodelling for how we provided day support, the staffing savings came through those three main areas. And then we had some posts that were just scattered across the adult services that made up the rest of the saving mandate.
Thank you, Jane.
That was the information you were.
That was right. Thank you, Jane. That's really helpful. We'll pick some of this up, but there's an awful lot more in your reports tomorrow than purely about staff numbers. But thank you for that clarification. Okay, we'll move on to Councillor Buckler. I think you're next with a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Councillor Callard, for introducing this report. There is a sort of overarching concern that runs through the whole of the report, as far as I'm concerned, which is the extremely deteriorating budget forecasting. When you look at February of 800,000, coming to us now at 3.4 million, that's an enormous deficit rising. Now, we know, I completely understand that things are difficult for all councils and that we have huge pressures relating from COVID onwards. But we have to find a way, don't we, of managing this and innovating to try and to restore some balance. Now, you say, interesting sort of phrase, you're going to carry on the financial discipline through to the end of the year. It would be really helpful to know sort of what financial discipline, are, and how are you innovating to try and to produce a much better outcome, because at the moment it's looking extremely worrying. And attached to that, the risk-based approach. Can you explain it, please? Because I know a lot of people won't quite know what it means, and how is that being factored into your strategy for this year? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. And again, I don't know who wishes to go first with that, Councillor Callard or Peter or Jonathan.
I think, Chair, this is probably more one for Jonathan and Peter, but I will just come in on the the pressure that's on our budget. I think I think there you mentioned £800,000 in February. It was in July that the £800,000 pressure was identified in Cabinet, which has since grown to this 3.3 million that we've got in the report today. I agree with you that I think it is a very concerning situation, and I would also comment that I believe we are being innovative in the ways that we look to combat it. We're bringing services in-house, such as some of our children's care, but some of these changes take time to develop. We're working through them at the moment. Our services are continuing to reform, and the savings targets that we set in last year's budget were ambitious. They had to be ambitious because of the challenges that we face. We've achieved so far just over 80% of those savings targets, which is this £2 million gap that I mentioned in my introduction. And I know our departments are working very hard to try and bring our budget position back. I think one thing that gives me some optimism, it might be misplaced, I don't know, but last year at this time of the year, we were also facing an overspend, but through the hard work of our officers, we managed to bring that back in through the autumn and into the new year and posted a surplus at year end. So I am, I guess, a little bit anxious, as you are, about the scale of the challenge that faces us, but I'm also it gives me confidence to know that our officers, they have their focus on this, and they have delivered in the past, and that I'm sure that they will continue to do all they can to close that gap.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. I think it's going to be important for us to understand the picture of what's going on here. So, yeah, we absolutely recognise, and I think my preliminary remarks were to recognise that these are very challenging financial circumstances for a lot of local authorities, including our council that we're very proud of. So we recognise that, and I don't think anybody is saying or suggesting differently. What we really are very focused on is, given that, what is it that we are doing to address those challenges, because simply identifying them as very difficult or problematic challenges alone does not do that. So it's very much that's the focus. So understanding what the picture is becomes extremely important to understand, are we doing the right thing? So you mentioned the way that we brought last year's budget to a conclusion. In July, we looked at the full year, and the picture there was that actually the core services of social care and children and young people and communities overspent by approximately £4 million in the year. So we were brought into balance by other measures, but our core services were running at £4 million over at the end of the year. And, well, we're now forecasting they're running at just shy of 3.4 million this year, but that is offset by what's in this report in terms of treasury and financing changes of 627,000. So the actual core services, if you take the benefit of treasury and finance changes away from that overall picture, they're running at over £4 million deficit forecast for the year, as far as I can see, so very much in line with where we finished last year. And I suppose just before Peter and Jonathan might want to just help us with this, the picture for the next 5 years, we'll be looking in a short while at the medium-term financial plan, but in July we were given an outline of the forecast for the next 5 years, which had a £35 million gap. Would this not, whatever we end up with as an overspend this year, and if that were to be the case, would that not simply add to that gap in real terms? making what looks already to be an extremely difficult one all the more so. So it'd be helpful just if within that context, please do correct any of those numbers or set them in the context that you think is appropriate. But if you could help us understand what it is that we're doing to bring the overspending under control such that we can actually have confidence that as we get through to what look like extremely significant financial challenges in the next year and the years beyond that, actually we're doing the right thing. So I don't know, Peter or Jonathan, if you could possibly pick up in those terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot within this, I know, but I think you probably touched upon the most pertinent point, which is in terms of, and it comes back to the original question around a risk-based approach. So I think when we talk to that, we talk to those high risk and high cost areas of service delivery, namely social care, additional learning needs, transport and housing and homelessness. The 4 or 5 key areas that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years have had huge volatility within them, both in terms of the demand coming through, but also the complexity. So when we talk about that risk-based approach, it's very much the fact that is our key focus primarily. Those are the areas that we will have most risk from, but also most opportunity to bring down cost over the short and medium term. There's a few things going on at the moment in terms of that. So the financial management board that was set up in the last financial year are focusing on those key areas. When we talk about some of the reform and change that's happening within those areas, there are 10-11 million pounds of service savings built into this budget that speaks to that very change, and it's delivering upon that is going to be key, as I mentioned in the introduction to this report. That's going to be key to bringing this year back in line, but also that recurrent impact it has on next financial year and moving forward. And to your point, Chair, around that 35 million pounds gap, we've made an assessment of the impact of this year and included that within that number. But ultimately, the more we deliver upon those budgeted savings in year, the easier it becomes in the following years. And it's going to be a key focus of the budget process, which I know we've got a report upcoming on next on the agenda. I think just finally, Councillor Callard touched upon, the challenging situation we find ourselves in. I think we have to appreciate that. We set a budget at the back end of February, which was based on the best information at the time. A lot of it, would have been based on forecasts around demand, the complexity coming through. Some of that has shifted quite significantly. We've seen that within some of the commentary that's in the report, particularly around social care and adult services, where the number of people presenting to the service, the complexity of that demand coming through has changed quite quickly already since that budget was set. And we have a responsibility to meet that demand. And it is providing a challenge in being able to take some of that change process through that the saving measures were based upon. But I think, between Councillor Callard's comments and those, I think that answers the question, Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. So just so we are establishing a clear picture. So the numbers that I summarised, I take it from the fact that you have not corrected anything, that they are the correct numbers. So the core services of adults, social care, children, young people and communities were overspending in round numbers at the end of last financial year at 4 million, and that was offset by what was done at a corporate and finance level, but the core services which drive those overspends and in which we need to find ways to manage the costs, they were overspending. The question that I was asking, adding to Councillor Buckler's points, was that if we get to the end of this financial year with an overspend of a similar nature to what is forecast, would that simply add to the 35 million that you forecast a shortfall of in July for the next 5 years, or would it simply be buried in that, but actually we'd move into next year overspending it on our services against a budget which would be at a lower level? So perhaps you could clarify that particular point, what impact this would have on next year and the 35 million.
Thanks, Chair. So I think just firstly, I think we just need to appreciate that there will always be flex within budget headings. Every year that I've been here at the authority, we've seen so, and I think that has grown over recent years. I think whilst we've had budget recovery measures in place, we will look to take all opportunities available to us to mitigate the cost pressures that we're seeing. If that means that we can be flexible within some of our treasury and financing areas and look to focus on those to provide savings, whether they're one-off or recurrent, I think that we'd be expected to do that, and that's just one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of that mitigation. To your point, I think I tried to cover it initially. Within our budget modelling, and I think as you would hope as a member cohort, we would make some allowance for in-year pressures that may have an impact on future years, and we will take an assessment of that each time our budget modelling is updated and use the best information we have. We have the budget item upcoming, which provides this, I guess, for want of a better word, a line in the sand and a starting position for our budget for 25-26. And we'll be working throughout the process to understand how the service demand and complexity coming through will impact that even further. But the best information we have at the moment and the modelling that we have within that next report on the agenda is accurate as of when we've produced it over the last few weeks.
Thank you, Jonathan. So if we were to get to the end of this financial year and we still have a level of overspend that is at this level, the report is very specifically making the point at 4.6 that reserves must no longer be used to meet recurrent revenue expenditure, and we can't borrow in order to cover those costs. What would the plan be in order to be able to close whatever gap there might be?
Thanks, Chair. I think I won't provide some conjecture, I guess, on what may happen at the end of the financial year. I think the key focus for us now as finance teams over the remaining months is to work alongside services to deliver upon the budget mitigations, and we've outlined the range of those within the report. The focus is very much on that, delivering on that. Those areas that will provide recurrent benefit and cost reduction are key for us, and that's where the focus will be. I think we've touched upon the schools position. That's going to also be a key focus for us, and delivering upon some of that budget recovery within the schools position as well will aid us in terms of that resilience going forward. So all all of those measures that we're looking to put in place are going to be critical. As I said, that financial discipline is going to be key, and we work alongside all services to look to embed that now for the remaining months of the year. I think helpfully we do have a second financial update coming quite quickly off the back of this, which will continue to give us better information and intelligence about how that budget recovery and mitigation measures is working through within services.
Thanks, Jonathan, and Peter might want to come in on this, but just to remove the sense that this has anything to do with conjecture, so this is your report, this is your forecast for the year end, and you're forecasting that at the year end, service overspend will be running at a level of around just over £4 million of the core services. So the question I was asking, related to what Councillor Buckler was talking about, is if we cannot use reserves, and you're spelling out that we must not in the report, and we cannot borrow to cover for costs, how would we deal with a forecast overspend? It's nothing to do with conjecture with respect.
So I'll maybe just come in on that point to start with. So we established when in fact we had a budgetary framework that was introduced, let's get my dates right now, last autumn, which supported the in-year budget recovery. It also aided what we then saw as the medium-term financial strategy that was approved by Council in July. You're right, Chair. There is one of those budget principles is not having recourse to reserves, and particularly in order to underwrite situations where we would overspend in any one financial year. Clearly, that introduces the discipline, and in fact the medium-term financial strategy, which was scrutinised here, talks well to the context of a council that isn't blessed with never been blessed with high levels of reserve, but obviously significantly under strain in recent years, and obviously we need to check that, and where those opportunities arise to replenish over the medium term. Yes, a circumstance could arise to the point and the question that we aren't successful, but we're not in that space at the moment. If we were unsuccessful in reversing the £3.4 million overspend, reserves would be drawn upon as the consequence. There is no simple way around that. But obviously, as Jonathan has introduced into the body of the report, there are a whole number of levers which were successfully used last year for to instigate the budget recovery plan, and what was delivered. Similar measures and levers that will be used in the current year. Two further things for me. One is just to recognise that this is the first full financial update that the committee has received. There was, I think it was an early update, John, wasn't it, that was encapsulated as part of the outturn report, which came through ahead of the member recess. The overspend that you have in front of you is actually lessened by recovery action that we have taken over recent months. I think if we hadn't introduced that recovery effort and gone down hard on cost, then arguably, John, it would be higher, would have been. So we're on a successful trajectory to start with. It's improving. It's also worth just giving members of the committee a bit of understanding of context in that we are not alone. It doesn't help at all in terms of, and again, responding to the question in terms of where we get to by the end of the year. But the WLGA is just finalising its the results of its budget survey. It's a report that will go in front of the Minister in coming weeks. And whilst that talks to significant pressures, certainly for next year, which I think we'll probably pick up in the next report, it talks to £220 million of in-year pressures being faced across the 22 councils. So we're not alone. I think social care and schools, John, were the two areas which were very significantly affecting that sort of capture of information across Wales. But it just exemplifies, I think, the situation. The reason I mention all of that, it's not just for information, for the benefit of context. Clearly, there will be ongoing dialogue with Welsh Government. We have an autumn budget statement at the end of October, and whilst that is principally there to aid as a tool to give indication of public spending for next year, the Chancellor will have opportunity to reflect on what is going on in public service in the current year. There is, and we have seen in previous autumn budget statements, consequential funding coming through, and it's really important that local government champions its cause, alongside, rightly, pressures that you'll well understand, Chair, that are being faced in the NHS. So, we have to work through all of those dynamics and introduce all of those levers to maintain exactly what John has highlighted, which is an undeniable discipline to reverse the 3.4 million overspend. To not do so will just simply introduce yet further pressure on the already significant pressure that we're looking at for next year. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Peter, and that sounds like really very important context that, I don't think anybody in the committee would have any different view about, in terms of this is facing local authorities across the country, and we're not alone, as you quite rightly put it. I suppose where we are alone, like every local authority, is unless there is external political financial support that we can conjecture about, and let's hope, because that can only be helpful. We will be alone in terms of having to fix our own problems and address them. There won't be any, white knights coming over. So just on your earlier point, for clarity, completely understand that the focus of officers is to try and remove the forecast overspend. And I'm sticking with what seems very clear from the report, that in the services, it's overspending by just over £4 million forecast. So, and I absolutely accept that the overall deficit forecast is offset by Treasury and financing changes, takes it down to about 3.4. But were that to remain the situation, even though it's very clear from the report, the words that are used in the report, that the reserves must no longer be used to meet recurrent revenue expenditure, we would have no option but to use them, is I think what you were very clear about. So that's why this is such an important area, because we've all got great interest and concern in that respect. Councillor Buckler, did I notice you were trying to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's just a couple of sort of additional points, totally sort of mixed with my original questions, which is, in the report you say there's a 2 million shortfall in the budget savings target. Is this in addition to the 4 million that we are talking about here? And also, we've talked about innovation, and Councillor Callard, you sort of picked up on my point of innovation. Are we actually talking properly to the people who deliver the services? Because those on the coalface can see often where savings could be made. And, how much are we doing that? Because it seems, I appreciate everyone is doing their very level best, but it seems rather a top-down exercise. I hope you can sort of elucidate on that, but it seems to me we need to know what people who are actually doing the work, they will see things that need to be changed, and how much are we doing that at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. I don't know who wants to pick that up. So the 2 million is...
sorry, Chair, I'll come in very quickly on the 2 million. So the 2 million is what makes up the bulk of the £3.388 million, which is as part of the overspend. So there's the £1.3 million, which is, I guess, unforecasted pressure in that area, and then that £2 million is the unmet savings targets. But I will hand over, if that's okay, for the discussion about innovation coming up through the ranks, as it were, from our offices. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. That's very helpful. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try and not sound defensive. I think in the construct of the budget, let's just start there. So in the construct of the budget, I would strongly push back an inference that is just top-down in terms of its construct. That is work that is undertaken across the wider leadership cadre that draws on the always ongoing engagement that goes on and within teams. Yes, it will vary from service to service, but I guess I reflect back at the important role of leadership and management in that regard. And in the same way, the earlier question, which I think was Councillor Bond's, around the pressure that is being felt on staff, I think leadership wouldn't probably be doing their job if they just sat there acting complacent to the demand that was coming through for it to just hit staff without being checked. So, leadership and management have, really important roles to play in terms of, reprioritising effort, manoeuvring capacity to where it's most needed, and often taking difficult decisions operationally in terms of things that just can't get done at a particular point in time. So, and in the same way, I guess, and in terms of back to the point, both in terms of the construct of the budget and what gets brought together, and I think that John's talked well to, Councillor Callard's talked well to in terms of, reform and innovation that is embedded right through the budget that we are looking to deliver in the current year. Lots of reform and innovation going on through all of social care. Difficult as well, difficult change in adults and in children's. Schools, I think, is probably a place where we're going to have to get towards in terms of addressing some of the structural deficits that are perhaps existing across schools, and that's going to be at the forefront, I think, of the budget process, already big and important part of it. But again, in terms of finally, in the in-year budget recovery, we cannot achieve the goal, which is to reverse this £3.4 million overspend without wide and deep levels of engagement down and through services. So I just wanted to provide that level of comfort back. And as I started out, I'm not trying to sound defensive. I think I'm just trying to represent, I think, what actually goes on and needs to go on. I think I agree with your point, Councillor Buckler. It would be really dangerous to just do that in splendid isolation. As leadership sat in the four walls of a room, and to make some, really important decisions that ultimately could have impacts on staff and on the services that we deliver.
Thank you, Peter. That's really reassuring in lots of different ways. Councillor Buckler, before we move on, did you have any aspect that you wanted to follow up?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Peter. And absolutely, intention is not to make the leadership team defensive. It's incredibly important that we explain to our residents how we do things, because we're the front line for all the people who live in Monmouthshire, and we have to do we have to tell them exactly what we're doing, because so often miscommunication means that there is a lack of understanding. So thank you very much for clarifying that. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Councillor Buckler, and to Peter and Councillor Callard and Jonathan on those particular questions. We'll move on to Councillor Strong, who's got his hand up.
Thanks, Chair. Been a lot of talk about innovation, and I think if you read through the reports for today and more particularly for tomorrow with the Health and Social Care, it is clear that there is a lot of innovation going on. The problem is that those are at a level where we save a few thousand thousand or a few 100,000 and not the millions that we would hope to be able to find. And that's simply because, you know, I don't think you can innovate at that level. And I think, you know, if we give the impression that we can totally innovate ourselves out of this situation, we're in danger of, you know, basically chasing rainbows in the hope of finding the crock of gold or even the Holy Grail. And you know, if they're there, well, not a single council in the UK has actually found that, and indeed some have found at the end of the rainbow not crocks of gold but unexploded bombs in some notorious cases. We're therefore left, I think, in the situation of having to look at where we can save 100,000 here, a few thousand there, and so on. And that's why we have this level of detail in our report. So I'd like to take us back to some of the detail in the report, as I may. A lot of the savings that we refer to come from staff vacancies. And clearly at some stage we will need to look at whether vacancies are temporary or permanent and so on. I'm sure heads of service and so on are very much doing that. If I can just pick up one example, page 26, is it? No, page 18 of the financial update. The carbonisation team, we're carrying 3 vacancies there, saving over £100,000 a year. Now, I don't know quite what that means, because I don't know how many are in the carbonisation team. That would be useful to know that. And how essential are these posts? Are they posts that are nice to have, and particularly nice because one of our priorities is decarbonisation, or are they posts that don't have to be replaced in the short term? That might be something for the longer term decarbonisation project. So, you know, I know that's a very specific question. We might not be able to answer that one today, but I think that's the sort of thing. Can we look at that one and do we know in that specific case, nice to have or essential? Yeah. And a slightly different question, a bit more crock of gold, but not a very big crock of gold probably. The reference to council tax. There is some evidence that the premiums, that would be premiums on empty properties, I assume, are starting to bring properties back into use. How firm is that evidence? Is it a gut feeling, or are we able to put some specifics onto that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. And who wants to pick that one up first?
Thanks, Chair. Perhaps I'll take the first item. I'm sure Councillor Carr will like to come in on council tax premiums as well, to provide some context. So just picking up, I guess, on that wider point of innovation, firstly, Councillor Strong. I think, as the next report on the agenda states, you know, we have taken multi-million pounds cost reduction out of the authority over the past 12 to 14 years through that period of austerity. So I think firstly it's important to recognise that as things progress, the challenge becomes harder. It's inevitable without investment coming through within public services. I think it's probably a little unfair to say that the savings targets for this year are premised on staff reduction. Some of that within social care is, and we've heard Jane Rogers come in on how that's being approached. The vast majority of that is within either further income generation, using flexibility within grant funding, changing some of our service models such that we prevent demand coming through the door, and help you know, those outcomes be met in a better and more efficient way. That provides us a lower cost approach to doing some of that. So I think the one example I would target there would probably be within our homelessness service, and in reducing the number of temporary bed and breakfast placements we have in place. and we've successfully done that and achieved cost reduction through that. So I think it's important, areas like that are recognised, whilst sometimes it's not labelled as innovation. It's very much, a change in service delivery that provides better outcomes for the user, but also reduced cost for the council. In terms of the specific point around the decarbonisation team, I think firstly we just need to appreciate how important some of that work is going to be in terms of our future consumption and decarbonisation work. So we will have seen benefit from some of that work now in the current year with reduction in energy cost alongside the reduction in rates, but also in our usage. The approach to that service over the more medium term will be a feature of the budget deliberations, I'm sure, for 2025-26. But it's an important tool for us in being able to both, develop our commitment to decarbonisation and the impact that we have on climate change, but also the associated cost of our energy usage as well across the council's estate. Councillor Callard, I'm sure will want to come in on council tax premiums. So we have a council tax panel that meets regularly and receives that data that shows that properties are coming back into use. We've talked about how we report that moving forward and the regularity of that reporting into whatever committee we deem appropriate. But I think there are positive signs, whilst I don't have the actual numbers to my fingertips, positive signs that we're starting to see some of that change. But also importantly, and as the policy was brought in to achieve, we're seeing that income come in that will allow us to affect the change that we're looking to have within the housing within the county and to provide better options as we move through time. But I'll leave it to Councillor Callard to come in and more eloquently summarise that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, John. I've been frantically hunting for the data on my laptop since you've been talking, John. Thank you for stringing out for as long as possible, but I was not successful, I'm afraid. So I don't think I've got a great deal to add, other than to say that the list of second and empty homes is coming down significantly. We're seeing a number of properties that were on this list go up for sale, go up for rent, which is really positive. I'm sure that we will see instances of people putting houses up for sale, or where they may not in fact be intending to sell just to avoid the premium for a short while, but because these restrictions are time limited, I don't think that's something you'll be able to get away with for very long. But it seems to me that the primary policy objective of bringing empty homes and also second homes into permanent usage is having the desired effect. John mentioned about the appeals panel that regularly meets. I sit on that panel, and one of the things that we've seen as part of those appeals coming forwards is the people who are renovating properties because of the premium coming in, and it's a significant financial incentive to get these properties lived in, to get them back into use as quickly as possible. So I think it's definitely having the impact that the policy was intended to have. And I hope that we can share some numbers regards properties coming in and out of the list and why they're entering and leaving the list soon. I think that would be helpful for the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And Councillor Strong, I don't know if there were any follow-ups that you wanted to raise.
Just very quickly, yeah, I mean, that's really interesting to hear, and no doubt some figures will be forthcoming in due course. I didn't mean to imply that we were over-reliant on vacancies and that nothing else was happening. I mean, as I did say, clearly there's a lot of innovation and ever hard work going on, but we do need to look at that element, and particularly to understand if a vacancy is going to become permanent, that becomes a permanent saving. If it's going to be filled by this time next year, that becomes an additional cost to us, and it's useful for us to have a clear picture of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. And it's just related to your question about decarbonisation. I thought one of the really striking reductions in expenditure was £820,000 in energy costs reduced, which presumably by consuming less energy we are contributing to lower levels of carbon release. So I'm not sure how that 820 was particularly, or the bulk of it was particularly achieved, but it's an impressive amount, which is good to see, and hopefully that can be continued. And to your point, Councillor Strong, about we're not trying to imply, I don't think in any of our questions, that any of this is easy. I think all of us recognise we've had many discussions about this over the last couple of years, and again in our pre-meeting. This must be deeply challenging and at times unpleasant for officers to have to try and work their way through plans that are sustainable to deal with financial challenges. So we really do appreciate it, and we really do recognise that. And when we're in this meeting and we're asking questions about it, it's not to suggest that this is anything other than challenging, but as I mentioned at the outset, have we got plans in place that will deal with those challenges is our focus. But thanks for those particular points and questions. And Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose this is first question to Councillor Callard, and I raised my concerns during the draft budgeting period about the ambition of savings in social care. I also raised concerns about the realisation this year of government policy in terms of the rise of the weekly non-residential care cap, which is clearly going to be another 375k pressure that we're going to have to find. And I hear what Councillor Callard said earlier on about the savings needed to be ambitious because of the budget position that the council finds itself in, and I understand that, but it also needs to be realistically achievable as well, because if they're not, then we're just sort of demoralising teams within departments. So I suppose that the question is, in terms of the rest of this financial year, how realistic is the expectation of reversing the current overspend trend? The second question is in relation to social care and children's services, and we can see in the documentation increase of children becoming looked after by the authority. And I don't want to go into the minutiae of this because, as the chair said, we've got a specific meeting tomorrow looking at social care. But are we investing enough resource to get upstream to build child and parent resilience and prevent families from breaking down and avoid children coming into care? Is this one of the areas that are impacted by the variability of grant funding? I'm just thinking of the Children and Communities grant in particular. So I don't know whether Jane could potentially pick that one up. And finally, Chair, in terms of schools deficits, it's been said 19 of the 34 are forecasted to end this year in deficit. I think 14 of those are primary schools. And just thinking about the primary school heads letter that was shared with parents back in May, and I know the council received a copy of that. In that letter, they have grave concerns about funding levels. They said the situation was critical. They done what they can to reduce staff costs and their day-to-day spending budgets, and the implications were, if we continue on this trajectory, was larger class sizes, a reduction in the removal of specialist support around well-being, behaviour, family engagement, all those issues that we said were post-pandemic pressures, and a removal of the extra help providing catch-up support for literacy and numeracy. So what is the message that we're given to head teachers, to those leaders in our schools? Is it we hear you, but or what is that message? What is that message of support about the future trajectory of spending? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. And who wants to pick that one up to start with? Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Pavia, for the questions. I think actually there's a common theme running across those questions, which is that our resources are scarce. They are scarce across all of our departments. You talk about health and social care and then move on to education. And, you know, I received the letter from schools as a parent of my two children who are in primary school in Monmouthshire. The bulk of the deficit within the schools sits within our secondary schools, even though numerically, of course, they're much smaller, and also the pupil referral service. It speaks to an environment, you know, which we exist in at the moment, where we don't have enough money in local government to fully fund all the services I think we'd like to fund. It's something that you know, we discussed in this committee, and it's something that we continue to lobby for in terms of increased funding for local government. Your kind of loop back to your first question around social care, are the savings that we predicted, you know, the concerns that you highlighted during the budget process, regards to how deliverable are those savings proposals. We spoke earlier about the necessary ambition to try and bring those proposals forwards because of the financial circumstances which local government finds itself within. I think there's a valid point there about us continually improving our forecasting. I know it's something that John and the team work very hard on in terms of making sure that when we're using data, we're not being too optimistic with the data. It's very easy to try and be too optimistic because it makes your life easier at the end of the day. Well, it makes your life easier until we have to come and sit before a committee and explain why we've got overspending in all of these areas. But I think it's something that we will continue to develop. But also, on the other hand, when we've got, you know, statutory services that we provide, where we are a hostage to fortune in many ways, where people present themselves to our service and we provide a service, we're obliged to do it, you know, both morally and legally. So it is very hard to predict how that demand is going to develop over a period of time. And where we've been carrying pressure, and you know, the chair made the point earlier about how much of this pressure is going to carry over into the next financial year. How much of that do we factor into carrying over to the next financial year? How much can we try and stay on top of? When we talk about this pressure, we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about the hours that people get to spend with care workers. It's not something that we can, you know, bear down on completely. We need to try and offset it in other ways. I know, Chair, you've spoken about you know, how we've got good performance in other areas of the, you know, the corporate side of the council, and how that manages to support our spending on our services. And I think the residents of Monmouthshire would be generally pretty pleased that that situation arises, that we can afford to spend more on our services because we do have outperformance in other areas of the authority. But it's a continuing challenge to make sure that we get our forecasting right, that we get our, you know, we get on top of our optimism bias, and that we continue to work towards this. Just looping back onto the schools piece, which I spoke about earlier, you know, your last question. We're going to go into a period now leading up to half term where we'll be meeting with schools heads and trying to understand the nature of their budget deficits. We've got some schools in deficit, some schools not in deficit. Try and understand the reasons behind this. I know you mentioned about increased class sizes. We've got a statutory limit of 30 on our class sizes, so we won't see class sizes go beyond that. And I would suggest, in fact, it's those schools which are not full, which have higher budget pressure, because of course their per pupil funding is less as a proportion of their overheads. You've still got to put you've still got to put a teacher in front of a class, even if you've only got 20 pupils in it rather than 30. There's a piece of work to be done there. I think there's, from my side, I am hoping to be further educated as to the nature of some of their pressures and as to how we can support them to handle it. And also, and we'll come on to this when we come on to the medium-term financial plan, as to how we can look further out as to how we can support schools as to what recovery looks like and as to how much we can expect them to recover, so we can get a realistic understanding of how schools funding should look, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard, and it's really helpful to have some of that context. I thought it was also perhaps useful to point out the reference to primary schools that Councillor Pavia made. I think I'm right in saying that the forecast, the carry forward projected for year end, where there is a surplus, I think it's in primary schools in every case. I believe that's right, but there does seem to be quite a different position between primary and secondary. Councillor Pavia, you asked also about prevention and resilience in terms of what we're doing further upstream, and I just wonder if colleagues are able to provide some insight into what we're doing there, because, and again, we can pick this up tomorrow when we're looking at this more deeply in health and social care. So I'm not looking for any in-depth response on this, but perhaps you might just say a word. And of course, Jane is on the call, but Jane, thank you if you're able to. But again, we'll pick this up in a bit more detail tomorrow, Jane. Just really a top line on this, if you could.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll try to keep it just at a high level for now. The question was concerning how are we investing enough upstream to really prevent children from needing to come into more costly services such as, child protection services or children looked after services. And I think the answer to that is always going to be, there's definitely more that we could do. But I think over time we've learned to provide those upstream services in a coherent and joined up way. We work closely with our colleagues in education to make sure that we do try to have that streamlined approach, and that wherever possible we're providing the services for those families who are most vulnerable. And I think we have a range of services that do start at that. Anybody can access them, point schools-based counselling, our In Fact team, but again, quite targeted interventions once you get into those services, right up to services that are really working to help families make long-term sustained change through more intensive support. And I think, we've just got to continue to work together in that careful, considered way, so that every resource that we put into the prevention is wisely used. There's always more, we always need more. And we are reliant on grants in a lot of these areas. Not all of the services are grants, but a lot of them are grant funded, and we maintain ongoing dialogue both at regional and national level to stress the importance of needing to get some of these services on a more sustainable footing. So I hope that that provided enough but not too much.
Jane, thank you. I think that's a really good balance. Obviously, we'll be picking a lot of your reports up tomorrow in some detail, and this will be an area I'm sure we'll want to ask a lot more about. Councillor Pavey, I hope you appreciate that, and for the avoidance of covering the ground twice. And Councillor Pavey, was there anything else that you wanted to follow up on, or you're happy with those responses? Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Garrett, and you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I would note we'd be having this conversation had Theresa May's 1.25% national insurance tax come in with social care. That would have been a huge help to the country, and unfortunately that didn't happen. We've also had £10 billion a year lost with national insurance contributions, which again is affecting government. We're here talking about cutting where the office has been cutting for years. So, we're in a difficult position. We all appreciate that, I think. As a former secondary school teacher, I ran a history department on £500 a year for textbooks and exercise books. I know the teachers contribute a huge amount financially to schools in terms of cost savings, turning the classroom lights off, saving energy, buying their own resources for their own personal development sometimes as well. So, but I was thinking whether we need to be looking at, getting staff, as Councillor Buckler said, to own. Is there anything they can do to save money within their own departments, within their own teams, giving ownership to staff as well to help them? We're all in it together, councillors and officers and staff of all the various services the council provides. For example, in Shire Hall, you've got the lottery funding, which has come in to help with the museum. So staff there work really hard to get that support. And they've also staff are on the front line making difficult decisions with individual residents about, for example, provision of school transport. So I know that the cost savings going on right across Monmouthshire, and it's hard. I was also going to mention we haven't talked about the school transport policy. I know it's going to affect this year, but again, the council has been looking forward to how we can save money in the future. We have been giving a more generous home to school transport scheme than other councils have, and the officers are, we have gone through that consultation this summer, so that's a future saving. I wonder if we could get an idea of how much that will save us going down the line, that cost pressure, because that might well be in the next report that we get rather than this one. Also, if older children are using public bus services, that's going to help with sustainability of our public services across the county. And as a rural county with railway transport around the county, not within the middle of it, bus services are vital. So there might be hopefully help to support the funding of bus transport with more older children using buses. I had a further question about consultations. Are we making the best use of our staff that we've got in terms of public consultations where we're not getting grant funding? Could we be looking at maybe an in-house team who've got expertise in coming up with consultations, who can maybe do the groundwork before, if we do need to get a specialist team in, we've got our own staff, because there must be staff that we employ that have expertise in designing the packages that we do consultations. That could be a further saving of money where we're not getting grant funding for those particular consultations. So those are my points, Chair. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. And but quite a number. They are points and suggestions that I'm sure will be picked up by officers and considered. What I noted in terms of questions were, can staff do more to own their own particular areas in terms of financial accountability and responsibilities, and could we do more in terms of consultations of staff to improve our ability for grant funding? So I wonder if I could just ask, and Councillor Callard, you ready to respond on those 2 points?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Garrett, for the question. There was a question, I think you didn't quite pick up on there, Chair, about the home to school transport and the financing of that and how that rolls around into next year, which I can answer if you'd like.
Yeah, I didn't hear a question. I heard a comment, and that might be one for the next year, which we'll be coming to in item 4. But by all means, I'm not for a second trying to prevent the discussion. But it wasn't a question as I heard it. It was more a comment. But please, Councillor Callard.
I purely wanted to make the point that the savings predicted by that change in distances were in the region of £700,000, but due to the cost pressures in that area, they wouldn't they won't actually deliver a revenue saving. They will just cover the expected overspend in that area due to the cost pressures that we've been seeing in home to school transport. So while it is a saving, it's more to combat a pressure rather than to reduce any saving on our bottom line. The questions regarding in our departments and how we can, I guess, capture the knowledge and the experience in those departments. I think Pete Davis captured that quite nicely earlier when we talked about how we build the budget and how we use our management teams to go down through our departments in order to bring suggestions and ideas forwards. It's something that I think we've had to get good at because of the situation in which we find ourselves. And I know that there's going to be those conversations happening now as we look to build next year's budget at this time. So it's going to continue to be a challenge, and we'll continue to use all the resources that we've got available to us in terms of that knowledge in order to get the the best data that we can and the best ideas that we can to build that budget.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And I don't know whether Councillor Garrett, you are content with that, or any follow-ups? You're happy with that? Thank you. I'm going to move on to...
Thank you.
Fine, thank you. I'm going to move on to Councillor Howells.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, sorry, that was ironic, because my question was on the passenger transport and the 623,000 overspend on that. I was just wondering if there's some clarification on how that's being addressed now. And the other item was just the solar farm. I noticed the income from that had decreased by almost a third. And my understanding not that I'm an expert in it, but I understood that solar generation was fairly consistent in its income. So is that just a decrease in the feed-in tariff that we receive for it? And I do share, obviously, Councillor Bond's concern about the vacancy freeze, but that's been addressed now, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howells. Who wants to pick that one up? Jonathan? So it's a 2 million gap and it's the solar panels.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So to come back on those specifically, I think in terms of our passenger transport, that's mainly around home to school transport, where we've seen a number of contract handbacks within the service. So ultimately, the authority has to take on those services as the provider of last resort. I think moving forward, I think I'm right in saying from around about now, October this year, all of those services will be with external providers, which gives us some certainty for the remainder of the year. What we have seen is an increase in demand across that over the last 2 or 3 years that is impacting on those costs. I think you'll appreciate it's a volatile area, given the rural landscape we have within Monmouthshire. It's always been a difficult service for us, and we do see increased costs perhaps compared to some more centralised models that other authorities operate. In terms of the approach to that for the remainder of the year, as I said, those contracts have been agreed now with external providers. We have looked at the routes and some of the route optimization we can take within that, but that's an ongoing practice that we have. But ultimately, due to the nature of the authority, as I say, we are very reliant upon a certain group of operators within that. Naturally, they've seen increase in costs themselves over the past few years that have been transferred on to us, but we continue to work with them to find the best solutions going forward. In terms of the solar farm, we have seen the weather play a part this year. That has had an impact, but we've also had some grid outages, which has impacted upon our ability to deliver that additional income that we were hoping, that would have been in line with perhaps the good year that we had in 2023-24. It continues to be looked at, but I think the best information we have at the moment is that, given the weather we've had and the rates that we've seen within that, we are going to see that shortfall against income targets.
Councillor Howells, are you content with that?
Thank you, Chair. That's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the question. And just as we're wrapping up this item, I think one of the issues, one of the points that I certainly hear from residents is that this year they're paying throughout the year 7.8% council tax increase, when the inflation level is running at 2.2%, and the Office of Business Responsibility is forecasting it dropping to 1.5%. So the question that I get asked, and I dare say other councillors are asked, why is it that we appear to have financing problems when actually the council tax is running at somewhere between 3 and 4 times the rate of inflation? I don't know if that's something you could pick up reasonably briefly, but it is something that I think is worth asking.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that's a good question. And again, I think all of us councillors get those questions from our residents about justifying council tax increases. The answer is twofold. I guess firstly, it's important to highlight that the majority of our funding doesn't come from council tax. It comes from Welsh Government funding, which obviously comes from Westminster on its route to us. That has been declining in real terms for an extended period of time, which is, one of the reasons why the council has had to deliver over £70 million worth of savings over the past decade in order to, keep our budget balanced. And I think that also needs to be combined with the increases in the costs of our services. I mean, this year, the cost of delivering social care overtook the cost of providing education to this local authority. I think I'm probably right in saying that's the first time that's ever happened. And that continuing pressure that we are seeing in providing adult social care, our populations are living longer, but not necessarily longer in a healthier way. That's a cost that we bear as a society. And I think it's a cost as Monmouthshire. We have a reasonably high average age in Monmouthshire. It's a cost that we bear probably more than some other authorities.
Thank you, Councillor Callard, and appreciate the clarity. It's, I'm sure, something we could discuss at great length, but it's very good to have a brief response. Thank you for that. And I'm sure tomorrow, Jane, will pick up on Councillor Callard's point about healthy years expectancy, which is identified very clearly in the reports that we'll be looking at tomorrow. Thank you for the questions, and particularly also for the responses to that item. And I just want to reiterate, I think on behalf of the committee, all of our thanks to all of the hard work that goes on with officers right across the council and staff right across the council, managing to deliver the very best possible services against a challenging financial picture. So it's hugely valued and appreciated, and the fact that we're asking questions is because that's our job. We have to try and understand just how are we doing the right things to deal with those particular pressures, and hopefully that came across this morning. I'm going to propose a 5-minute break before I expect the next item not to be anything like as lengthy, but that depends very much on how many questions there are, because we've probably moved into covering quite a lot of that ground, but I don't want to close down any conversation. But we also have another item, number 6, to consider. So I'm going to suggest a 5-minute break, if that works for everybody, and we'll reconvene at 12:05. Hope that doesn't damage any lunch plans, but thank you in the meantime. online, we're just waiting for Councillor Callard to return, so if you could just bear with us for a moment. Thank you. Here he comes now.
Sorry, Chair, I've been here. I've just been waiting for the meeting to start.
No problem at all. No problem. We were just holding back until we got to the next item because we're sure you'll want to talk to the next report. And thank you, everybody. We're restarting, and item number 4 is the medium-term financial plan update. And we're looking at 3 particular reports within this. So over to you, Councillor Callard, to perhaps introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide the latest 6-monthly update of the Council's medium-term financial planning and to set out an initial model budget shortfall for the financial year 2025-2026 and to agree a budget setting process that will enable a balanced budget to be presented to Council in March 2025. The financial outlook over the near to medium term remains challenging, and the initial budget shortfall modelled for 2025-2026 is large, representing 5.5% of the Council's net budget. The Council will need to draw on its experience and track record of bringing forward significant savings proposals. Income generation, cost reduction, tax increase, application of grant and service change will all need to play a part in achieving a balanced budget. This is a challenge that the whole organisation will need to respond to positively with thoughtfulness and urgency. It is achievable, but there will likely be unpalatable choices with the service offer in some areas reducing. Budget modelling and underlying budget assumptions are based on accurate and up-to-date information. Amongst other things, they benefit from in-year budget monitoring information, assessments of legislative changes that impact service delivery, independent advice and analysis, and demand projections based on trend and data analysis. The proposed milestone dates in developing the budgetary process for 2025-26 are shown in figure 4.9 in the covering report. The main report in Appendix 1 contains a considerable amount of data, as you'd expect. It's a thorough report, and I'd like to thank the Council officers involved, especially John Davis, for their work on it. Some of the issues we've already touched upon in the financial updates, such as schools' budgets, are also highlighted here, but with a view to a more distant horizon. Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate that, Councillor Callard. Thank you. And just to Jonathan and to Peter, if there was anything you wanted to add to that, or will we move straight to questions?
Thanks, Chair. I think that pretty much covers it. I think, as I mentioned, perhaps in the last item, this is an important report. It provides us with a line in the sand and a starting position for the budget model for 25-26, but also importantly, outlines that more medium-term approach that is going to be key as well for us. So, no, I think outside of that, Chair, happy for the committee to provide their feedback.
Thank you, Jonathan. So over to committee members. Any questions? If you have, please raise your hand. I see Councillor Bond. Over to you, Councillor Bond.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and the report. Yeah, very comprehensive again. 2 areas of questioning, please. The first one is on page 5 of the supplement regarding the future generation evaluation. I wonder what will that look like? Is it like the integrated impact assessment? Is it a consistent format? Is it best practice in Wales? Is it something we've seen before? And the mitigation, so this is the mitigation of any budget changes and savings. This should all go, I guess, to the risk register. And there was a statement that it'll be reviewed periodically. I wonder if we can firm up on that as to who will do it, how often. And obviously we need to do it right. Additional to that, 5.4 says we'll be using profiles of typical Monmouthshire residents. I'm concerned that a typical Monmouthshire resident doesn't exist. How would we cover intersectionality and non-typical residents? The other area, was mentioned just a little bit earlier, why Monmouthshire is better at being able to, this is 3.7, why Monmouthshire is better able to raise money through taxation, so therefore gets less money as a settlement. That's of interest, but please, if someone can answer that. And then the other area is building on what's been said before. I understand that we have not had the money. Basically, we haven't had enough money come from Westminster from our taxes over the last for many years. And another issue is Brexit and along with those other reasons for the supply chain and costs. I realise that. And from back to what Councillor Strong has said, we shouldn't be looking for rainbows or unicorns, maybe. And I applaud everything you're doing to include.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Councillor Bond, I think you've probably covered about 5 questions there already.
No, just the two. Just
okay.
Three areas. Sorry.
All right.
So there's one is the why Monmouthshire is better able to cost. What's the future generation evaluation? And this last one is applaud and appreciate your involvement of everybody. Totally agree, and I'm sure you're doing it. I just wonder if. I know that we spend quite a lot of consultants and experts, perhaps 4.4 million last year. I wonder if we're looking at actually value stream mapping our processes and reducing waste, perhaps using lean experts. Because if we streamline now, when we do get that money back, the money we should be receiving, it'll make us even more efficient. Thank you. So there's 3 areas. One is the future generations evaluation. What does that mean? How is that different to IIA? And how does that link to the risk register? This part of that is a typical Monmouthshire person. I don't know who that it might be. Why Monmouthshire is better able to raise money through taxation, and is that fair? I guess not. And the last one is, should we be looking more basically at processes and waste and using lean experts or some sort of other tools as the NHS are to try and identify where we've got waste and be better and more efficient? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. I'd also noted down your question about mitigation and budget savings and changes and how often they are reviewed. But anyway, I think my counting is probably fairly good because I'm writing down the questions as you're asking them, but we'll see how much we can cover. So who wants to pick up? Councillor Callaghan, did you want to address any of those particular questions?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bond, for the questions. I think some of them are pretty technical, which I'll leave to the officers, but I will just pick up on that that point about the council tax and like Monmouthshire's ability, I would say the perceived ability of Monmouthshire to be able to generate more of its income through council tax. I think we're seen as a county from Welsh Government an affluent county. You know, a lot of our properties are in the higher council tax band, so those that, you know, are lucky enough to own property in Monmouthshire, you know, could perhaps class themselves as more wealthy than some, but I do think that it does hide a lot of pockets of deprivation. A lot of people who are, you know, don't own property but rent and struggle within a very expensive rental market, and we are in danger of a self-fulfilling prophecy here. Whereas if we continue to have to increase council tax in order to make up the shortfall from our Welsh Government funding, you know, on a per capita basis, then we make ourselves even less affordable for those on lower incomes to come and move to Monmouthshire. So it is something to be wary of, and it's something that we will continue to advocate for with Welsh Government, that being a rural county, we do carry costs that some more metropolitan counties don't have in terms of, you know, we talked about home to school transport earlier, that's a classic example, but also, you know, our care staff have to cover quite a large geographical distance to see their clients, so that also has an impact. But I think it's a point well made.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. Jonathan, Peter, did you want to pick up? Peter.
Thanks, Chair. I think if I start and then might hand over to John with questions that are remaining if I've not captured them all. So I think the first question is in respect of our impact assessment, and I guess in terms of how we assess for impact, whether that be wellbeing future generations, equalities impacts and the like. And I think we've evolved our approach, in fact, year on year, particularly under the last couple of years under the new administration. And I guess it runs true to, I guess, what's at the centre point of the community and corporate plan. Certainly ensuring that we understand well the impact on those that are vulnerable in our communities, and certainly in terms of those disadvantaged groups whose voice might otherwise not be heard, which I think is your point, Councillor Bond. I think in terms of the reference, I think, which was to do with the atypical Monmouthshire resident, I agree. I don't think there is one, but I think what you will have seen if you go back to most recent budget rounds and the paper that gets brought in alongside the budget proposals and the overall impact assessment. The work of the performance team really is to identify a number of different profiles of resident. For example, a family with 2 children, or an elderly person who perhaps lives on their own, etc., etc. So. And that's to make sure that we do stress test the approach and actually understand the impacts, so that we don't get those unintended consequences. But I think it is important to recognise, I guess, in terms of being wholly inclusive, that we do sort of make sure that we identify the impacts. Those are identified both through individual assessment of budget proposals as well as cumulatively. So it's it's a robust process. And we have been drawn forward to input into sessions with the Wellbeing and Future Generations Commissioner because of how mature our approach is. It is more robust here than in other places, and that can be seen by just simply looking at the budget papers that are made publicly available across the 22 councils. In terms of risk mitigation, I'll offer a brief comment, and if John wishes to sort of come in more fully. It's back to this comment, I guess, in terms of a budget. If there's one thing that's a given in a budget and a budget round, it's that things will change, and every day will bring a different bit of information or updated information that needs to inform and influence some of the difficult decisions we're going to have to take. Risk is a really key point within that, and obviously the update report that John's brought together talks to some of those key risks, and they will evolve and they will develop and there will be new risks, and some risks will be mitigated. So that is it's a dynamic exercise that sort of intertwines, I guess, the budget process as it evolves. To the last report we just heard on the in-year. Similarly, as we work through the year and look to manage the budget, and I think, John, your report and the recommendations actually, or the front of the report that we've just seen through as the first item, talked to some of those risks. So we're not just looking, for example, at a £3.4 million overspend. You've got to understand your context and your risk at the same time, hand in hand. Final point in terms of use of consultants, if I think I've caught it right, yes, certainly with you, Councillor Bond, in terms of the need to always keep on top of that. It will always be a feature of our spend. It's a similar conversation you get into with agency staffing as well. It plays its part at times. There is a necessity at times because of circumstances where either you may not be able to recruit, or circumstances where the nature of the work needs doing we either don't have that internal capacity and expertise, or it offers better value for money to actually draw on the expertise in the market for time-boxed pieces of work. Notwithstanding all of that, we are committing to undertake a piece of work and the possibility of maybe getting an independent review of that. So it's not just officers, I guess, sort of reporting back and saying that our use of consultants offers value for money. Maybe looking to try and get an independent lens back in on that. But hopefully, that piece of work, if it evolves in the way I'd expect it to, is something that I'm sure will be of interest to the committee. John, if your capturing of questions was better than mine, I'll hand over to you if there's anything I've missed.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Jonathan.
Thanks, Chair. I think we've covered pretty much all of that. I think just the one point to make on the use of consultants, I think as you'd expect, Councillor Bond, we're looking at all areas of non-pay spend within a budget process, and continue throughout the year. Consultancy will be one part of that. I think we just need to be a little bit careful sometimes when we're trying to do a like-for-like comparison, perhaps across different organisations that we are comparing like-for-like. There will be areas where the flexibility that provides can be justified, and a prime example there would be a capital scheme which is time limited, perhaps grant funded, and there's conditions on utilising that grant within a certain time frame, then a spend within that area will be justified. But that isn't taken lightly, and where we are better able to do some of those things internally, we will be taking that into consideration as well. But just that one additional point. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. I see Councillor Buckler, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, Chair, can I come back, please? So thank you very much for your response, and of course you're many men, so you were talking directly to the budget. My concern actually was also around specifically how that information, those mitigation from those impact assessments, so it's more the people-y things and the impact on people and services, how they get to the risk register, how that is monitored, and especially the mitigations, not just the money side. And I know I'm talking to the money people, so understand that. So really it suggests that there's a new sort of assessment, how that links in, how that's going to be monitored and used to make sure that not just the money side but the impact on the actual felt services by the customers, which are our residents, is seen. And the other thing wasn't really, I was just using the consultants budget as an example, but I was actually asking about us looking at processes and how we reduce waste, and if we've got money to have consultants, how we can actually improve our processes and do some value stream mapping and be better for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond, and you have identified Peter and John as the money men. So I'm not sure.
No, they're used to talking money. Sorry.
I'm not sure that's something that there's a definitive description at all. But in any case, I think we know what you mean. But just on the point of impact on people as much as impact on finances, and the point that just a bit more, if you're able to clarify on what reducing waste looks like. It might be value stream mapping. It might be something else. But if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think just brief comment. I think it's a point well made, and I think I'm trying to sit myself on the other side here, and in terms of all the information we produce, in terms of performance reporting, budget monitoring, reporting, etc. It's an open question as to whether we sufficiently close the loop, I guess, in terms of what we said we would do at budget setting by way of mitigating action. Vis-a-vis the overall impact assessment, and demonstrating that in fact has actually happened, So I'll maybe take that point away, Chair, Councillor Bond, to have a conversation with Matt Gatehouse, Chief Officer, and who holds responsibility for the sort of performance side of house. And it's from within their teams. They undertake the work, and for finance in terms of doing the overall impact assessment, as well as actually looking to scrutinise and stress test the individual impact assessments as they come into the budget. So I'll take that one away.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Bond. So over to Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this 6-monthly update on your budget modelling. Regarding council tax, you say the assumption is on modelling, not on a cabinet decision of rising to 5%. So what have you modelled that on? I see that there are service pressures have reduced from 7.5 million to a projected 5.1 million. So why is that lower, and why is council tax up? And regarding second homes, I was interested when Councillor Callard talked about the reduction in second homes in Monmouthshire. Are you looking to get rid of second homes completely? Is that the sort of the aim, so that it will only they will only be residential council tax being factored? And how many second homes have reduced since the policy has been implemented? Thank you.
Just so we don't go back to the previous report, we're very much now focused on the medium-term financial plan update. So happy to take the point about where that's leading, but I really don't want to go back into the previous report now about what actually, what's happened up to now in terms of this in-year update. Councillor Buckler.
Can I just sort of clarify, Chair? I'm not looking at what's happened before. I'm just wondering how it's going to be factored in for the year coming that we're looking at.
Well, great. We're saying the same thing. So looking ahead and to what extent that plays a part in the medium-term financial plan. So who wants to pick up those particular points? Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay, I'll just come in briefly. I think it may be that John wants to come in afterwards to provide a little bit more detail. On the modelling assumptions in the financial plan, they have changed because our intelligence has been updated. So in terms of the council tax, that has been adjusted to represent the average expected council tax increase in Wales. Similarly with our pressures, they've also been adjusted based on the most recent data that we have. I suppose the only thing that's certain for me is that these numbers will change as time goes on. They'll continue to change. So it's hard now to, I don't think you could draw any conclusions on what the budget will look like in terms of the proposals in it from this adjustment in modelling. It just lays out a set of scenarios which we can then calculate based upon. On the second home council tax, you asked a question, do we want to see the end of all second homes in Monmouthshire? No, we don't. What we'd like to see is homes being occupied. There are many successful holiday letting businesses in Monmouthshire, and most of those, I think I can say most, will not be paying any council tax at all because they will be occupied for more than 180 days a year. They will pay business rates rather than council tax, and often their businesses are of a size that no business rates will be due. This section of the economy in Monmouthshire, I think, provides, it generates wealth for Monmouthshire. It's something that we are proud, but what we don't want to have, or I think what's less desirable, is to have those second homes which are maybe occupied for 1 or 2 weeks a year and left empty the rest of the time. They don't bring footfall and money to our high streets. They don't put children on seats in our schools. and they don't make such a contribution to society that we see from most of our residents in Monmouthshire. So I think occupation is what we're looking for in our in our residential dwellings. We want to see people in those houses, whether they are long-term residents, whether they're owner-occupiers, whether they're renting, or whether they're on holiday. But what we don't like to see is properties left empty, because I don't think that's good for Monmouthshire's economy, and I don't think it's good for our services.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. And this is very much about the medium-term financial plan. So I'd like to not move this into too broad an issue about what might be different approaches around second homes. But the question was about second homes, not about businesses that are holiday lets or about empty homes.
Those are registered as second homes, Chair, for the purposes of the reports.
So you've been clear that what you appear to want to see is that there should be no second homes that are not occupied for to a level of 180 days a year. I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, but I'm trying to get clarification to the question. The question was, what is your plan for second homes? And it sounded like that you were saying very clearly that you don't want to see people having second homes in the county that they don't occupy or they don't sublet. Is that correct?
The question was, do you want to see an end to second homes? And the answer to that question is no. The follow-up is that I would like to see our residential properties occupied as often as possible.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Callard. And was there anything else that Jonathan or Peter you wanted to add to that, Jonathan?
Thanks, Chair. Just to touch upon one of the questions around some of our modelling assumptions, we have committed as part of the medium-term financial strategy that Council agreed in July, committed to improving and I guess looking at a little bit more depth at some of our modelling on an evidence-based approach to that, and that's why we've reduced our line for service pressures down from £7.5 to £6.1 million. But consequently, we've seen an increase in the non-play inflation assumption. So there's 2% included within the modelling for that. If we brought that alongside the 5 million, the answer would probably be very similar, but I think we're looking to be a little bit more evidence-based on some of this. So this is a starting point. When we put an assumption of 2% inflation across that, we'll be looking into the various areas of supplies and services to see what is within that. So that won't be a blanket approach of 2% for everything. There will be areas that perhaps need more consideration within that. So this is, as Councillor Callard said, a starting point for us in terms of our budget modelling and strategy for 25-26, and every figure there that we've talked about will change through the process. So hopefully that gives a bit more information on the thinking behind that.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's just to really make the point that the terminology of modelling assumptions has been suddenly materialising. Actually, what we're looking at here is a medium-term financial plan. It's your medium-term financial plan, and it's all we've got. We don't have something else. It's not called the medium-term modelling assumptions. It's called a financial plan. And we are less than 6 months away from the start of the first year of that financial plan. And we are probably no more than about 4 months away from when the administration will be formulating its budget for it. So I think we should probably move away from some vague language about modelling assumptions and actually come back to what this is, which is a medium-term financial plan. I see Councillor Pavia with your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just touching on the assessment point and the assumptions potentially around 5% council tax increase next financial year. Has any assessment been carried out on an impact of 5% council tax and what an increase like that, the impact that such an increase would have on low-income households in Monmouthshire, and whether or not alternatives are being explored to offset community impact. We spoke in the earlier item that given all the lower hanging fruit has now been picked, more radical approaches to service redesign or reductions are required. In terms of education, I recognise the push to eliminate surplus capacity and surplus places in our schools. But considering the medium-term perspective, when should the council contemplate a review of the size of the school estate as a necessary option? Looking, over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And just touching on that last point, Chair, in relation to data, and it was again referenced in the last item. Are we confident that we have identified the right matrices and we are collecting the right data to make the best evidence-informed decisions that is required? I know this was an issue that we needed to improve in relation to our commissioning capacity, but are we confident that we are capturing the right information to make those necessary decisions? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. Who wants to pick up those particular points?
Thanks, Chair. I don't mind coming in on some of that. So I think in terms of, firstly, in terms of council tax, I think as we outline in the report, it's very much for modelling purposes at the moment. It's reflective of the pressures that we are modelling to come through, and balancing that alongside the other income streams that we will be able to generate or forecast that we will be able to generate for next year. So it is purely that at the moment. In terms of the impact upon residents, the council tax reduction scheme that sits across the service, it will support that, and any increase in council tax would see growth within that budget as well, and that would look to support those residents that would look to call upon that. The question around the size of the school estate, I think it's probably important just to clarify what this report is and what it isn't at the moment. We are coming to the start of those deliberations around the budget for 25-26 and with a view as well on the medium term. And all of these options will be things that are worked through over the coming weeks and months in the lead up to that draft budget. The report goes into what that change and programme of change could look like for the authority. That was initially a feature of the medium-term financial strategy that was taken through in July. It outlined a number of areas that the council will be looking at in terms of that programme of change. That is something that will be worked up and delivered upon as part of the budget process, as you would naturally expect, and there's a range of factors that are outlined in this report that touch upon what that may look like. So I think as you'd appreciate, Councillor Pavia, all of these things will be looked at in the round. But this isn't a static process. These conversations will have already started very early on in this process. Not sure if I missed the last question, but I think that's the two that I picked up on, Chair.
Councillor Pavia, are you content with those responses?
Yeah, I think that the last one was in terms of data, and are we identifying the right matrix, and are we collecting the right data to make the most evidence or the best informed decisions based on the evidence that's there. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Jonathan, do you want to just speak to that very briefly?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and absolutely touches upon a pertinent point, something that we're looking to develop now as we go through the budget process. it's all well and good having data. It's having useful data that is most important, and data that speaks to, specifically for a budget process, the impact upon cost, but also the outcomes for residents as well. So those pieces of work are developing in train and in parallel to the budget process with our performance team, but also the wider services playing into that as well.
Thank you, and thanks for those responses. I'm aware that we're moving towards the last item of the meeting, and I'm aware also that Councillor Callard is going to have to leave shortly. So just if I could, one last point and question that you might be able to address briefly, and this might be one for Peter and Jonathan, but whichever, Councillor Callard, if you wish to respond to. So the MTFP highlights an initial 2025-26 budget shortfall of £11.4 million, which is 5.5% of the net budget. And what you described in your July financial update was, and I quote, the need for radical change to the Council's operating model. And when I looked at 4.9 at the timetable for actions, I couldn't see anything, and I haven't heard anything earlier today about a change to the overall operating model of the Council that was deemed to be absolutely critical. So I wonder, could you provide a bit of clarity on that? And appreciate that we could talk about this a long time, but if you can do that briefly, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Probably best if you come in on that, I expect, Peter.
No problem, Councillor Callard. I think a point that I relayed across to the Chair just in the break, just on this very point, this. One of the commitments as part of the medium-term financial strategy was to up the tempo of the medium-term financial planning updates coming through. They'll be now 6 monthly, and they provide, as to John's earlier point in the debate, which is around they provide best information at point in time. I would hope that the members of the committee would accept and acknowledge that there's obviously an awful lot of work going on in the background at the moment as we work ourselves up and towards draft budget proposals being shaped and then brought through Cabinet in January. Jonathan's just talked to, I think, what was, John, 10.10 in the report, in Appendix 1, isn't it, I think, which obviously should give the committee a good feel for some of the cross-cutting areas, some of the specific horizontals, verticals that we need to go into, and that will inform, to Councillor Neil's point, a different operating model. We've talked through today in both items about innovation and reform. This does present a bit of a conundrum, given the scale of challenge facing local authorities, and Monmouthshire being one of them, because it is a balance to be struck, because as was the question, I think, of the Chair earlier in regards to the in-year position about the consequence, I guess, of not arresting a 3.4 million shortfall under recourse to reserves, and obviously the discipline that we need to introduce to address that. But in a slightly similar regard, if there's one given, it is that we will have to set a balanced budget when we bring proposals forward at the end of February, early March next year. An £11.4 million shortfall is in no way insignificant. It's far from it. And obviously the challenge over the medium term equally. I think the balance we will have to strike is a very, very carefully crafted one, because in some areas we will need to react, and in order to bring savings forward, and those savings will have to be introduced probably more quickly than we would otherwise like to bring them forward. But but it will have to be carefully balanced in such a way that it does not knock us off course with regards to the types of reform that we need to bring forward, and that are probably more readily realised over a medium-term period. It's a very careful balance that's got to be struck, because there are consequences to obviously bringing those levels of cost down and so quickly. It is the work that's going on in the background, and that centres itself around that table in 10.10 of Appendix 1. Lots of work ongoing. You'd expect conversations to be going on with other local authority partners. Those are actively being pursued in many spaces. We've got a job to do in terms of the delivery of, I guess, NIC, the asset management strategy, rationalisation of estate, our digital and data strategy. Councillor Pavio, your point on data, and in terms of that driving better and informed decision making, in terms of digital and the potential that affords us to be able to drive productivity and deliver services at reduced cost. These things don't happen at the blink of an eye. They take time because it requires, similar to, I guess, a read across, and this is an important point, to adult social care as an example, an area that Jane and Jenny Jenkins, head of adult social care, are obviously leading on. There are, I think, Councillor Bond, there are people involved, there are staff having to be, on the one hand, delivering frontline service, and on the other, adapting a different type of service delivery model. That is culture and practice change needing to take place, on the go. This is really difficult territory. So I just hark back to the point that, this is a balance to be struck. I can't give you all the answers at the moment. I don't think there's probably many councils, if you wanted to approach them across Wales, who would be in a position to provide you that level of granular detail at the moment, because they are all going through similar types of sensitive conversation. Because ultimately, I'm sure councillors didn't come into power to come into place in an administration to obviously see services reduced. I don't think anybody does. I certainly don't from an officer perspective. And I think we've been pretty successful for quite an extended period in terms of maintaining service delivery. It's under a significant amount of strain at the moment. It's going to leave us having to make some really tricky decisions. So hope that's probably about enough from me at the moment, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. And we'll obviously come back to this as you derive more definitive planning around that. And thank you for that explanation. We appreciate it. We're going to move directly on to item 6 because I know Councillor Callard has to leave shortly, and I don't know, Councillor Callard, if you have enough time just to introduce the report, which is on investment and commercial portfolio. Performance update, and I would just remind councillors that please be careful not to breach confidentiality in terms of any of the commercial issues related to this. We need to be mindful of that, and if we were to get into that, I'd need to stop the recording and we'd moved into closed session. But Councillor Callard, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think if it's okay, I'll introduce this report and then hand over, because I do need to leave. I'll leave you in the more than capable hands of Nick Keys. This report provides an update on the current performance of the Council's commercial and investment property portfolio, including Castlegate Business Park and Newport Leisure Park, MCC's County Farms portfolio, and its retail and industrial portfolio. The combined gross income for all investments and commercial assets, inclusive of acquired investments for 2023-2024, was £3.628 million. Since acquisition, both acquired investments have generated a combined net income of £2,042,074. This position will improve as a consequence of the net surplus forecast for 2024-2025 as outlined in the report. The investments of Castlegate Business Park and Newport Leisure Park were acquired via the Council's asset investment policy, The asset investment policy facilitated acquisition of assets to meet the strategic aim of generating commercial returns, thereby helping to offset wider budget pressures facing the council. The policy also established the criteria for evaluation of commercial and property investments measured against the return on investment or net income return over and above the borrowing repayment cost. At the time of acquisition, prudential borrowing was used to acquire or invest in property with the cost of borrowing serviced by the resulting rental streams. As a result of the council's risk appetite and the ongoing strain on its financial standing, any further investment will only be considered in order to support the core policy objectives contained within the council's latest community and corporate plan and where deemed prudent, sustainable and affordable. The Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee now receives 6 monthly updates on the performance of the council's property investment portfolio, of which I believe this is the first. We're joined by Nick Keys today, Monmouthshire County Council's Head of Landlord Services, who should be able to answer any of the questions you may have regarding our commercial portfolio. And I'd like to say thank you to Nick and his team for this report and also for their continued good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard, and thank you also for holding on. I know you messaged me a few minutes ago just to say that you were just holding on as long as you could. Appreciate it. And hopefully you get on to your meeting in time. Nick, could I... Yep, Chair. Nick, could I just ask you if there are any particular points you want to bring out about this, or we'll move into questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Only one specific point, if I can, Chair. Actually, I think Councillor Callard summarised the kind of body of the report really well there. The one point that I wanted to acknowledge, perhaps unsurprisingly, is in relation to Newport Leisure Park and specifically that of the Cineworld or Cinema Group that we have as one of our tenants there. I think whilst obviously it's captured in the report, I think it's worth acknowledging because this is the first opportunity we've had as certainly as officers to publicly speak to as what has been a very commercially sensitive operation that's been taking place with the Cinema Group, and obviously confirmation, if you like, publicly now of what has actually been implemented. So as set out in the group, I think everyone's aware, it's been well publicised that the Cineworld have been subject to a national restructure was the intent. Obviously, like many cinema chains, they've been going through some financial challenges and have therefore been trying to implement since earlier this year a company restructure. As part of that restructure, all landlords that benefited from a Cineworld tenant, if you like, were contacted by the restructuring group to formally classify them as one of 4 different creditors. So in essence, a landlord is a creditor, and they've classified you based on the level of turnover that they generate within a particular site. And within the report, I've spoken to that, but at a very high level, A, B, C, D, and E, A, B, C, D, A being sites that have a high level of turnover and are not subject to change. So of the 101 cinemas that Cineworld or the Cineworld Group occupy within the UK, around 30 of them were in Class A. Class B, of which there were roughly 35, would be subject to a rental reduction. So they are sites that with a reduction in rent could remain profitable and remain open. Class C were sites that would be subject to nil rental. So in order for the cinema to remain open, no rent could be paid to those landlords. And Class D, which were sites that even at nil rental would need to be closed. Obviously, up to this point, the details around our classification is very sensitive. The restructure itself is subject to a High Court enforcement. So the High Court themselves, as a tribunal, receive that and, as an independent party, determine whether the restructure is reasonable. As of last Monday, that was approved. So hence why there was discussions over how much information would or wouldn't be exempt. I think I'm pleased to say now that's all public. Monmouthshire County Council's site, being at Newport Leisure Park, is Class B. So it is proposed that not only would the site remain open, but it will remain open subject to a rental reduction. This committee will understand, whilst I can't disclose the specific figure that is proposed for the reduction, I have included in the report and liaising with other Class B creditors that some landlords have been subject to rental reductions of up to 87%. Monmouthshire's return is far more favourable than that, and more importantly, I think, and perhaps to give confidence, 3.7 of this report, which shows the return on investment for the acquired investments over this year and next, is inclusive of that rental reduction. So just to translate that a little bit, the reduction that is proposed and now implemented by the courts is allowed for within these figures. So even with that reduction, Newport Leisure Park continues to generate a surplus, and that's reflected in these figures. In terms of the restructure itself, as I say, it was implemented last Monday. In terms of actual timing, the restructure will come into effect 3 months from execution. So in essence, our rental reduction will be from Christmas, and that will be for a period of 3 years. So the kind of threshold, if you like, of the restructure being approved is that after a period of 3 years, the company will have recovered, and then the rental value will be able to return to that of pre-restructure levels. Clearly, we've committed a lot of time and sourced expertise to advise on our options as a landlord. There were opportunities to perhaps terminate the lease or look at alternatives. I think we're really confident and comfortable with the decision that's been arrived at by not only the courts, but clearly our classification. The local intel that we received was very much acknowledging that this was a site that was of value to the group, and they wish to retain it open for a number of reasons. I think that's proven to be the case by our our classification as a Class B creditors. So lots of information, within that, Chair, about a very specific tenant, but hopefully helpful in terms of, I think, what would be a very critical item and of interest to this committee. As Councillor Callard said, more than happy to speak to any of the items within the report. Clearly, our acquired investments are not the only properties that we asset and generate, that we manage and generate revenue from. The commercial investments were later in this report are equally important, and again, happy to pick up any questions on any of them. So, yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. That's very helpful, and the report itself is quite clear in a lot of areas. Councillor Bond, I can see you have not disappointed me. You are in pole position on the grid again. So it's over to you. Your hand is up.
Okay. I don't know why everybody else is reluctant, but I do wait a while. But when you ask, often, not this time, but the other times, but nobody else steps forward. Okay, right. So talking about Newport Leisure Park, thank you very much for the information. Thank you very much for the update. Really informative. I wonder if, again, we've got a rather optimistic viewpoint. I know Councillor Callard was saying a bit earlier. Is it optimistic what we're saying, or realistic? Because every time we are less than the 2% return that is expected and demanded, and again we're saying, but so-and-so is going to come in soon, but they didn't, or we were told the vets previously, and then someone's gone into Pizza Land premises. So is this realistic now, and should we be looking at some sort of other mitigation or some sort of contingency? And we completely understand the need to keep the majority area renter, then the biggest percentage of the land that's been used by Cineworld, and it's brilliant to support them. I just wonder, should Monmouthshire residents really be subsidising a private company? And is this still fair related to the other people, the other premises, the other businesses that are renting land or renting buildings from Monmouthshire County Council? So there's also a bit later on, there's a statement that the risks will be looked at and the contingencies will be looked at later. But I hope and suggest that the contingencies should be looked at now, in case. So really, is this realistic? Because we've had this a number of times and we're still not making the 2%, and we're still saying, well, no, next year we will. No, the year after we'll make the 2% or whatever. It's been going on for quite a while, and it's not anybody's fault. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, is this realistic? Should we be looking another way? I mean, obviously, it's in Newport, it's not in Monmouthshire, so we can't put it on the LDP. We can't use it for any other purposes because it's not in our county. So that's a bit of a downside. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Nick, did you want to pick up on those questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bond, for the questions and comments. A few things, I think, just capture risk probably as a whole. So to give you confidence, absolutely, part of my role is looking at risk management, clearly with colleagues as well. We don't want to be projecting anything that we don't think we can deliver, and I think part of that is why I kind of echoed the comments really around the Cineworld reduction in rental. You're quite right, this is an investment asset, so as we sit here now, things can change in terms of a particular tenant, be it for any asset that says their circumstances change and they need to vacate. The way way we mitigate that is clearly looking at lease events. So we obviously project and look at, is there a circumstance why a particular tenant at a particular date may need to vacate? The Newport Leisure Park is slightly unique in that the nature of the sector. So clearly, we don't have to go over COVID, but we appreciate the leisure sector itself materially changed. All of those tenants were subject to not being able to trade for some time, and their rental terms and lease events may have changed as a result. But I can have confidence in terms of what's now been put in place. You alluded to a specific tenant, if you like, in terms of vacant space within the property. That very much remains an active interest, and I noted in the report that one of the 2 vacant units is under offer. We shouldn't forget it's only 2 units that are vacant at the moment at Newport Leisure Park, and that is reflected in the figures. Just a key point of terminology, and important to come back to, I think, Councillor Callard's comment around return on investment. So when we talk about subsidising, we have to be really careful. At the moment, Newport Leisure Park meets its cost of borrowing, okay? So when return on investment, which is the 2%, is obviously an income target that was attributed to the asset when it was acquired. Clearly, the leisure sector itself, the terms in which we might have acquired have changed from if we were perhaps looking to purchase Newport Leisure Park today versus back in 2019. But at the moment, it continues to exceed those borrowing costs. So when we talk about fairness, I suppose by definition, the fact that the High Courts have received the information from Cineworld and justified that it's a fair rental reduction would suggest that that's reasonable. That is not the case that Monmouthshire residents, if you like, are supplementing Cineworld. It's just that a rental has changed in accordance with fair to reflect what is their turnover. So that's the point on kind of return on investment. But again, to try and give you confidence, I absolutely acknowledge that we could be sat here in 6 months and I could be saying that there's either more interest in another vacant unit or things may well have changed. What we reflect in the projections is what we know to be fact, and what we know at the moment is that there are a number of tenants which are not looking to vacate or don't have tenancies that are coming to an end, and we have, of the 2 vacant units that we have, we're in negotiation with one of those tenants, which, as I've said in the report, we hope will be trading by Christmas. Cheers, thanks.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Chair, can I just say, really appreciate it. It must be very difficult. It's just the forecasts, if they could be a bit, realistic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Councillor Bond. I'm going to move on to Councillor... Sorry, did anyone else want to come in? Peter, were you trying to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Just wanted a point of reinforcement, I think, and for once I'll be brief. So I think it's just important to highlight, I think Nick has sort of captured it himself. So the forecasts that are within the report, they're not overly optimistic in terms of, I guess, factoring into our forecasts, vacant space being let. I think that would probably, I don't think I'd want to get into that position really. I'd rather, to your point, Councillor Bond, make sure that our forecasts are stood upon our current tenancies and to reflect and demonstrate the success that we've had in improving occupancy, both in Castlegate and NLP in the recent couple of years. We don't need to go into some of the challenges that we've had because they've been different for each. But in a similar way to conversation I had with Nick last week when clearing the report with Castlegate, for example, it was just to get a proper feel of, notwithstanding obviously the interest in the vacant space, just to understand under various scenarios as to where that would take us in terms of not just being above borrowing and clearing that as benchmark, but actually working towards the type of benchmark return that we'd probably want. So it's just to give you a level of comfort, really. That personal view, I think the forecasts are built in, on the right basis, prudently. But obviously, it's right as per this performance update that it talks to. The live interest and the opportunity for us to strengthen occupancy and return even further.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to move on to Councillor Garrett.
I didn't want to leave Councillor Bond on her own there. I'd just like to thank Nick and his team for their hard work in negotiating with Cineworld. It's a key tenant. I use that facility very often with my kids, go to the cinema, but you also go and have a meal, and so it's going to help drive other businesses in the area, and the business mix hopefully will improve as we get other tenants in to replace the ones who vacated. The cinema industry has obviously gone through quite a lot with COVID and the Hollywood writers' strike, so hopefully this pragmatic deal that's been struck will see the cinema industry go from strength to strength as things change in that particular industry. I know of another town where I grew up where there's a brand new cinema been built by the local council and it's empty. So I think, credit to the officers for getting this deal struck and keeping that key tenant on that site. Also encouraged by what's going on at Castlegate as well. Obviously, it was unfortunate that Mitel left. I'm not entirely sure whether we knew they were going, what contingencies were in place when we bought it. But anyway, Monmouthshire is attractive to film production companies. We've seen in Monmouth this week with film production going on in the centre of town. So what are we going to do to kind of sweat the assets that we've got, maybe with the film industry in Monmouthshire? That's something I'd like to ask Nick as well, whether there's potential that these production companies might drive other businesses and other film production companies to come here. We had a big film production, I think, down at the Seven Estate a few years ago, in one of the warehouses there. So let's see if we can get more film making in Monmouthshire. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. This is very much about our investment and commercial portfolio, not the wider assets, but very happy if you wanted to just address that. That was the question I heard.
Yeah, thank you, Jay, and thank you, Councillor Garrett, for the comments. Yeah, very kind, and I think actually really fair comments as well, just in relation to the opportunity that might exist in relation to kind of film production. So in the report, as you've captured, we've had a film company very recently rent the space for around 6 months to film a Channel 4 programme, I think, which included them utilising Caldecott Castle and various other locations around Monmouthshire. I think that the benefit of Castlegate, whilst it has different constraints, being a building of the age that it is a flexible space. There are many rooms that lend themselves to many different purposes. So I know Cabinet had the opportunity, or members of Cabinet had the opportunity, to come and view the kind of film set that was created in what perhaps to me would traditionally just be an office, but was turned into something for a film set. I think the key thing for us and challenge for us is being in those right conversations, I suppose, and making sure that those networks are aware of an opportunity that might exist. Not to speak for Channel 4, I suppose, but I know they really enjoyed their experience at Castlegate, and whilst financially clearly made sense for us as well in terms of a strong return, I think the early indications are they're very keen to come back to Monmouthshire and Castlegate specifically. So I think, just to echo that point, if the portfolio as a whole enables opportunities to access other assets or other investment opportunities in Monmouthshire, then clearly we'd like to do that.
Thank you, Nick. And Councillor Garrett, that looks like you're satisfied with that response. Thank you. Councillor Buckler.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Nick, for your report. It's fascinating what the council holds, how it's spread, and the diversity. So thank you for that. And I think actually, since acquisition of Castlegate Business Park and Newport Leisure Park, to have a income of $2,043,000 is definitely a win, and it's good to see. And you're obviously managing things well. On that sort of point, what do you do to encourage new tenants? How do you go about enticing new tenants when current tenants leave? And also, how much rent does the council receive from Raglan Livestock Market? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the questions. Taking the broad one, if you like, because this applies, I suppose, to all assets in terms of how we encourage tenants. Some of that is around, obviously, where we advertise. So clearly, we have a MCC website where we advertise our space. We have a number of chartered surveyors that obviously are within the team or within our broader networks, where when an opportunity comes up, that we would advertise. Does vary across the assets. So you'll appreciate things like our industrial units and the 3 estates that we have within Caldecott. They largely advertise themselves in terms of it's a very popular area where there's high demand, so very little needs to be done actually in terms of broadly businesses come to us. In the case of Castlegate, clearly we're trying to advertise further afield. I think it's interesting. I think Councillor Garrett picked up the point around Mitel, and I think it's right that there are still many a tenant that we liaise with who understand it to be the Mitel building and want to understand how much space is actually available there. I'm really pleased to say that compared to 2 years ago, there's not very much space left now, and that's obviously a credit to what we've been able to do. But we're all the time trying to advertise more. So certainly, as I say, we use our own website, we use our own networks. We have managing agents as well who support aspects of the management of these estates, so they clearly advertise through their broader networks across the region. And we're in contact all the time with our contacts in economic development within the authority, for example, approaching the likes of Welsh Government and saying, is there an investment opportunity that Castlegate or any other assets could help facilitate? So that's probably the broad point in terms of marketing. In terms of Raglan Livestock Market, I believe it's captured in the report report, so forgive me for not knowing off the top of my head, but I think I did include a note to say it. So since 2013, when the livestock market was constructed, it's £929,611 of rental that's been generated from the livestock market. It's not, whilst I wouldn't necessarily answer specifically because of the commercial sensitivity, what I would note is the livestock market, perhaps unsurprisingly, is quite a complex rental arrangement because it's tied to turnover, tolls, commissions, etc. I think we have a good working relationship with the auctioneers there in terms of the model, and hence why I was keen to include the figure. That's probably the level of detail I'm going to touch on for now, if you like, but that's certainly in the public report, is that kind of £900,000 figure that's been generated since the asset was created.
Thank you, Nick. That's very comprehensive. And Councillor Buck, you're content with that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Very satisfactory answers. Thank you, Nick.
And well, it looks like our final question, Councillor Pavia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Nick, for the report. Just briefly on the commercial portfolio and 3.39 in terms of Innovation House. You said about the looking at a proof of concept launch of My Spaces on the ground floor there. Are you able to elaborate in terms of what you're looking at? Are you looking at more sort of smaller office pods and sort of diversify? I'm just thinking, those that are on the fringes of Newport East and are on the M4 corridor. They may be small businesses, and they may be sort of independent, individual traders who might be interested in small sort of podlets. So just wondered if you are able to elaborate on that concept. Thanks.
Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks to Councillor Parvey for asking the question. I think good opportunity for me to promote it as well, I think. I think the short answer is yes, in terms of what you've said. I think we've had Innovation House marketed for larger office lettings for a number of years now. Obviously, during the pandemic, we formally stepped away from Innovation House as an operational asset. Whilst we have had tenants there, we have a tenant in the building at the moment, and we had the Welcome Centre there last year as well, which occupied for a number of months. There is a significant space that we'd like to let, and given its location, being on the M4 and just off the motorway on the junction, you'd like to think that it would be attractive. I think what Innovation House speaks to is, I think, the challenge of the office sector more generally, actually, at the moment. Increasingly, there's a movement to smaller lettings. Mon Space, as was listed in the report, I think is a reflection of that at Castlegate, actually. So at Castlegate, we had a number of smaller meeting rooms that perhaps an individual tenant may have been reluctant to take in its entirety. So we separated them into smaller individual suites managed by our estates department, and what that's resulted in is a number of smaller occupiers that perhaps didn't have permanent premises or were in Monmouthshire and likely to go elsewhere, who've said they've stayed in Monmouthshire as a consequence of that flexible arrangement. The nature of those terms as well is far more flexible than you might expect from perhaps a commercial operator in Cardiff, where somebody can occupy for 2 or 3 months and then move on. Now, the reason I cite that as an example is I think Innovation House lends itself to that model as well. Clearly, in open plan offices, there are costs associated with trying to create that, but the ground floor of Innovation House certainly works well for that. We are in contact with a number of operators as well. I think you'll be aware of them, other operators in around Monmouthshire or Newport that themselves occupy buildings and run this themselves. Proof of concept, I think, is what we're after here. So if we can do something ourselves that saves money and we directly manage, I'd be more inclined to do that. If that results in something more holistic, then when someone's inclined to take the entirety of the first floor, for example, then we'd like to work towards that. So yeah, a long-winded answer to say yes, that's the intent, smaller pods and things that might suit smaller occupiers rather than larger.
Thank you, Nick. And I see one more question, and that's all right, Councillor Howells. I see you've got a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for allowing that question. I'd refer back to the previous report on the medium-term financial plan, and in that you identified the land and buildings that are considered for alternative uses and disposal. It's not clear on ongoing cases for continued use. So, are there any pieces of estate that you are looking to offload or sell now?
Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. I think So in terms of answer to the question, it'd only be part of my role, if you like. We're always actively looking for opportunities to generate either revenue or capital return. In this context, clearly it's revenue, it's about rental is what we're speaking about. So none of the assets listed are ones that we're actively saying that we perhaps instead should dispose of. I think like anything, it'd be prudent as officers and in consultation with Cabinet and Council to reflect on, for example, the likes of an innovation house. Is it actually more beneficial long-term to be looking at a disposal rather than retention? It'd be inappropriate for me now to say, oh, here's the list. If, like I said, we're not necessarily working that way, but I think you're right to highlight, Councillor Howells, there is an ongoing budget commitment in terms of rationalising property. We'll all be aware of individual assets that currently are perhaps empty, not generating a rental, and have maybe development potential or an alternative use. Those are ones that form part of the list and that we will actively be pursuing as part of this kind of budget process. So I think the answer is yes, there's absolutely assets that we're actively looking at. In the context of this report, if you like, these are the ones that are generating a revenue and therefore we're inclined to keep them. Those that aren't, as in accordance with the asset management strategy, we want to be maximising them, and if they're not, then it's prudent we ask the questions to say, should we be retaining them?
Thank you, Nick, and really good to hear your responses. You come across very knowledgeable, and that's very reassuring about what we're looking for. Sorry, we thought you were looking for a follow-up, Councillor House. I was just wrapping up, unless there's any other question on that. And so thank you. Thanks very much for the responses and questions on that report. And I'm going to move that report and the three financial reports we've had. First of all, item 3, finance update. Item 4, the medium-term financial plan. And this one being the investment and commercial portfolio performance. And just before we conclude, moving on to item 5, back to item 5 is just a reminder, as if you needed a reminder, that the next meeting is on the 8th of October, which, when I looked at my diary this morning, is tomorrow. So thank you for everyone's forbearance on that. It's just the nature of reports coming from councillors and getting in ahead of cabinet meetings and council meetings. Thank you everybody involved in a lengthy meeting. It's been very helpful and hopefully very illuminating, and I call the meeting to a halt now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.